All right.
And Michael, any additions to kick us off, or I know we're planning to jump right in tonight?
Jump right in.
Okay, let's do it. So what we've done, sorry, but what we've done in the packet that went out, you should have all gotten the memo that really summarizes where we left off last time, so we can hit the ground running tonight. At the request of our co-chairs and many of you, we don't have a long preamble. We don't have a lot of slides tonight. We're going to pick back up with the transferable development rights conversation. There was a summary of the discussion that we had at our last meeting just last week that we're going to really lift off from. So Mona and Michael will introduce that tonight. We're going to jump right into it. We're going to try to stick to about 20 minutes for that conversation using the same format we did last time. If there's a new idea, take a minute, describe it. We'll discuss as a group for a few minutes, and then we'll take action with alacrity and decide whether or not we want to move on. For the next conversation tonight, TDRs will leave us right into redevelopment. And so we'll spend about 20 minutes on the redevelopment conversation, and from there go into house size. At that point, we're going to take about 60 minutes to go around the horn and really just talk about house size and the scenario as a whole, since that's one of the final big decisions to make. At our last meeting, and as you saw in the packet, we got to the range of 8750, 9750 as a group. What you saw in the packet is the greenhouse gas benefits to those different house sizes. So we'll pick up there. And then with overlay being the last part of the discussion tonight, we'll try to wrap up with that and determine really what's left for the overlay to do, given all the other pieces of this scenario. So one other thing before we dive into it, staff has been looking at the packet as a whole, the recommendation, the scenario, all its components. It just has some overarching thoughts on how we should be looking at this through the lens of implementation moving forward. So here, I'll let you and Steph kick that off.
Sure, I'm gonna take 2 minutes, but at the end of the last meeting, someone had asked what's staff's perspective on the recommendations that are really emerging, and I think the comment that we've been talking about for 10 months is that this is the community process there. I think this looks so much different than than the 2020, right? Because you all have come up with many different ideas and concepts that we didn't even think to come up with. And from your conversations, I think a month ago, staff got together and we came up with different ideas that we hadn't talked about, such as removing competition from square foot, right? Because of the conversations that you all have been doing. And so, I think it is extremely reflective of the community and that this committee of the compromises that you all are working on. And I think the staff statement as we look forward is, do what you all want to do with each of these pieces. As Suzanne and others and Cindy, all the wisdom in this room has said, be bold and make the statements that you want to make. None of these in isolation will get to any of these values kind of layered together. They really start to get to all the different values. And that is really to all the work and dedication you've been putting forward for the past 10 months now. We'll keep it at 10 months. And, I also will share, I know that there is the new TDR concept and that's being put forward. And again, I will echo, that this is reflective, your recommendations are reflective of the community and what you all want to see put forward. I think from the staff perspective, there's still unknowns about it. There's probably complexities in it that we don't yet know about. And quite frankly, don't know how the board, because it's a brand new idea, right? And so I leave it all to you of if this is the program that you want to see brought forward that represents the values you all have, then make that recommendation but do it all in making what and to Cindy's comment always about zoning is do what you want to do, right? Make the decisions that you want to see implemented on the ground and be bold with what you want to see made. Got it?
Right.
Hand it over back. This is your committee.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Kara. So we want to just move forward and dive right in. Do you have anything else you want to add, Miles?
No, I think that's the setup. So I know Michael, I think, was gonna maybe introduce the TDR concept, Mona, or was that gonna be?
Yes, Michael?
Okay, thanks. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Online as well? Okay, thanks, Sierra. So in the packet was a kind of a white paper on this TDR idea that we additionally sent an email out asking everyone to read. Half of it is in some ways done in that the first two items, the denomination changing to 500 square feet, and the ratio changing for the rural and remote, amplification from 1,000 to 2,000 rather than 1,000 to 2,500, and then an understanding that the other ratios will be determined kind of based on study. Randy's idea, which is number 3 in the packet, which is the resident TDR, seemed to be met with great enthusiasm in the room last week. And then the number 4 on the list is this idea of extinguishing residential TDRs as a requirement in tier 3s and tier 4s, which would go further than just transferring the development from one location to the next, which again, because of number 3, includes many more locations, because there is a way to extinguish square footage in locations other than rural and remote, or transfer square footage from areas other than rural and remote, and the short list of places that exist in the existing TDR program, to include potentially many more. And we think that the appeal of this is that it reduces total square footage, but also that it gives current homeowners the ability to do what the folks in rural and remote have done, which is to take development from one place, move it, extinguish it from another in another, and that potentially allows them to stay in their home. It incentivizes homes staying smaller rather than building to the full allowable square footage that they might have. And then it asks of the larger homes being built in tiers 3 and 4 to go kind of above and beyond and extinguish additional square footage, and therefore extinguish the impacts that come with greater square footage, as a price for going big. And I'll pause there and let Mona add anything, and Randy as well, because the residential TDR idea really was his, and we kind of beat it all up and put it into this single TDR concept document that runs through all 4 things.
Do you want to add anything?
I guess I think the white paper is pretty good in terms of starting point to kind of dial in our discussion. But Joe raised an issue that didn't really hit me when I read it, but my thoughts behind the RTDR idea was that those TDRs could land anywhere, not just in the UGB. His takeaway from that was that we were saying that the only place that an RTR could land was in the UGB. That was not what my thought was. My thought is that it should be a universal. I've also had another thought related to this, and we can kind of talk about it if you guys think it warrants it. But we had talked about the 1,000 square foot bonus square footage in the UGB for basement, and that it would require 2 RTDRs. Cindy kind of put it a little bit an additional twist on that, which personally I like, about yes, but you also need to buy a 3rd TDR, she said an RTDR, to extinguish that 500 square feet. So basically for every 1,000 square feet that you're going to build, and this would apply to tier 3, tier 4, and the bonus square footage in the UGB, you would be extinguishing 500 square feet for every 1,000 square feet that you build, correct? Okay. So my thought is that with that as an incentive, it maybe make more sense to actually increase the UGB bonus to 2,000 square feet. Because now we would, with the idea that we're gonna have a bigger landing, more landing opportunities for these RTDRs, and we're gonna be extinguishing 1,000 square feet rather than just 500 square feet. So to me, it's like, and we're starting at 4,750, remember, so I thought, you know what, maybe it makes sense actually to rethink that 1,000 square feet that we talked about last time and kick it up maybe to a 2,000 square foot bonus. The other thing that I thought, and in the white paper, it was expressed as needing to buy for the bonus square footage 2 RTDRs or 3 RTDRs. And the question that I asked is, well, what if there's no RTDRs available? I don't think that that should be a deal breaker for those people to take a bonus. But, and then I had this additional thought, and I haven't really decided whether I really like this idea or not, but you guys can kick it around. And the idea would be, and it can be a little confusing, but if it's RTDRs, you're gonna buy 1 RT or 3 RTDRs, extinguishing 500 square feet to do 1,000. If you did TDRs, my thought is that it had to be 2 TDRs for the 1,000. So basically, for 1,000 square foot bonus, you would have to buy 4 TDRs, RTDRs and regular TDRs, if there are no RTDRs available. With the idea being that it would actually incentivize the buyer of TDRs to buy RTDRs first, which is good, because we want to have a viable market for that. But if they don't, or there is none available, they still have a mechanism, but they just got to buy 2 regular TDRs to extinguish instead of only 1. So it's a little confusing, but I thought it was like, okay, well, maybe that's worth talking about in the group and seeing if that resonates. I'm not for complication. I'm really trying to keep these. I mean, I'm really not.
I mean, it's a little complex, but it solved all the issues I thought of when I kind of walked through this, just like you did. I mean, we have no idea what that market's gonna be like for an RTDR. We think it's gonna be pretty good, but it may ebb and flow, and I thought the same thing as you is we have to have a way to get through that. I don't feel we should just mandate the RTDRs, but we do want to prioritize that somehow or incentivize that somehow. So yeah, it's a little confusing, but I don't think it's horribly confusing. And sometimes it takes a little confusing to get it right. So I'm all on board with that personally.
Tim has
Well,
his hand raised.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Tim, you're muted. You need to unmute, Tim.
It's not clear to me how these 2 TDR would compete with one another and which one would prioritize. And the fear is that the RTDR may attract more attention than the rural remote and draw the attention away from the rural and remote TDR system as we have it now. So I guess my question is, how do we not throw out the baby with the bathwater, and how do we prioritize if we want to? Does
Well,
that make sense?
yeah, that makes sense for sure. And I think for me, from my perspective, it feels like there's still a lot of positive energy in the room for this concept. And we could probably spend a lot of time like diving into the details and figuring it out. I'm wondering if we want to forward this and say, here's some parameters that we're talking about as opposed to maybe some specifics at a high level, that we are very interested in our TDRs and TDRs and figuring out a way to compensate the, and again, there's some definition around that that's needed, long-term residents. And we want to be able to extinguish square footage. And what we're trying to do is neutralize some square footage basically, and give some priority to our TDRs, preserve the backcountry. So we have, I think, the high policy level bullets that we can share, but we may not have the specifics. And I told John earlier, I had a little coffee today, so I'm like, kind of like, let's see if we can move through some of this stuff. And if we can all agree and say, let's push or forward a high level policy that includes our TDRs that allow for some maybe bonus square footage, extinguishing square footage in other places. Can we go forward with that as a high level policy?
So let me just comment quickly on what Tim would say in the way that I can kind of see through that. So I can see the RTDR and TDR thing that I just described for the bonus square footage in the UGB. For any other TDRs that are landed tier 3, tier 4, outside the UGB, our TDR equals TDR. It's 500 square feet, they both land, there's no requirement for extinguishment. It's just freely traded. And so there's, the only overlap is in this bonus square footage in the UGB where we're saying, okay, you can get 3 TDRs to build 1,000 square feet. We're going to extinguish 500 square feet. Or if there's no RTDRs available, or for whatever reason you want to buy regular TDRs, then it's going to be 1,000 square feet to build 1,000 square feet. I mean, 2,000 square. We're going to extinguish 1,000 to build 1,000. So that's where I see the overlap is in the UGB, and outside our TDR equals TDR, 500 square feet. It all just kind of works, and the market forces will take it over.
So you're really isolating that to the basement bonus.
Because it's bonus square footage,
So-
and that's also why I was suggesting 2,000 square feet instead of 1,000.
So I really think it can be explained that if you want basement space, this is your truck.
Exactly.
And yeah, so it actually is very smart.
And I want to go to Cliff, Debbie, and Brian, who's got their cards up, and I think, Mona, you're exactly right. The key question is, do we like this concept at a policy level? Do we want to move it forward for further implementation? One of the key provisions in the recommendation, remember, is implementation work groups. The devil's in the details, like, Randy and Tim are pointing out. That work group would then be charged with figuring out a lot of this stuff. So at a policy level, does it make sense to move it forward, or do you have concerns about it? And so let's try to stay at a high level so we can move through this relatively quickly, just to determine if the concept advances. So let's go Cliff, Debbie, Brian.
Well, I had 2 major concerns. Tim addressed one of them, and that is rural and remote TDRs. I think that if it was easier to buy from a homeowner, 500, 1,000, whatever it is, that's going to take precedent over it. And I haven't heard an idea yet, a specific, of how we're going to protect rural and remote and still keep that market hot, hotter than this. There are a lot of folks here that own single family homes, and they see this as a chance to cash out. I'm not against that, but I'm still, the main purpose of TDRs from the beginning was to preserve the backcountry, which is we're a resort. And if we don't preserve the backcountry and the mountains, that's the only reason people come here. We're all going to take a hit. We don't support the resort economy. So I want to hear an idea of how how rural and remote TDRs are more valuable, and that system will thrive with this going side by side with it. I mean, the basement, you confused the hell out of me with that, I'm sorry. And again, I'm not against it, but I just want to know an answer to how do we protect rural and remote and that program? And I don't think this does. I think this is going to compete and it's going to take over.
And Cliff, I would say to that, to keep it at the high policy level, if that's a concern that the group shares, that should be explicitly stated in the recommendation that we're exploring this concept. And that's a concern that needs to be explored prior to implementation, that at a policy level, we're not implementing anything, we're exploring the concept.
Okay, I get that. The second thing is, I'm not thrilled with the idea of transferring development from one place to another, and that there's no limits on it. I do like the idea of incentivizing within the UGB, but there are too many neighborhoods that are overbuilt. And I don't want to see it continue along that process. And I don't see where the community comes out of this any better by just shifting 500, 1,000, 2,000 square feet from one neighborhood to the next. I get the extinguishing part, I like that. But those are my two major concerns, and before I would want to see this go to P and Z and to BOCC, that's where I think the discussion needs to be, is how do we protect those two things?
Yeah, and incentivizing the development of the UGB and distinguishment.
Well, my thought is, one, I agree with a lot of things Cliff just said, but and the other thing is that I think a lot of us voted this way on the 2,000 square foot, reduction. We were gonna go 1,000 and went to 2,000 based on preserving the backcountry. And so I really think the regular TDR program, preserving the backcountry, was voted on with that thinking, okay, we're incentivizing that. So I don't like the idea of something competing with it, although, as Cliff said, I like the idea of kind of, what I would like to see is actually on the whiteboard, this square footage, sold here, transferred here, can be transferred here in this amount, and all those numbers, I would love to see kind of the formula written down up on the whiteboard, so we could kind of like visualize exactly the amount of square footage going from here to here, and extinguishment of this based on whatever, that would really help me kind of decipher it all, is seeing it written down.
So do you, I guess both and sorry, Brian, just a quick question. Do you, just as anybody, do you generally approve of the concept, or you need more detail? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and the other thing is, I approve of the concept, but the other thing, I feel like we're so close to getting through kind of our original list, and this is sidetracking us, and that maybe this needs to be addressed, as Cliff said, with P and Z and other people, and fully developed. I feel like it's a complicated enough issue that for us to tackle it right now at this kind of late date in our process is maybe asking a lot.
Okay, fair enough.
I'll second Debbie's comment there at the end. I think if anything, go forward with a couple of bullet points that raise these as questions for the implementation process. Number one, should we allow existing homeowners to get TDRs for the retirement of the 500 square foot chunks? Right. And then the second being, should there be a second class of TDRs? Because I really think that's what you're going to end up. And look, I deal with some pretty sophisticated stuff during my day job. And I was reading through this and I was listening to the presentation. I was like, okay, you lost me here. Right? Because what I fear will happen is there will be two separate markets, one for TDRs and one for RTDRs, and they will have different prices. And it will be like, wait, which one are you using? My view would be, number one, if you're going to create a TDR from a retirement of existing home space, it's a TDR. It goes into the pool. The other thing that I flinched at when Randy said it, and I don't know if he meant it this way, but that if we could use TDRs anywhere, not just within the UGB, then the scenario of an existing homeowner in the UGB giving up space for TDRs that they could then use in the rural and remote, in theory, you got it going the wrong way. And so there's a lot of devil in the details that you read through this. And I'd say, number one, Do we allow for extinguishment of TDRs? Yes or no? Because I think that's actually a really good concept, and if I were a land preservation authority, I might be raising money to buy TDRs to extinguish them, which would be kind of cool, right? And then the second is, do we allow for existing owners to gain TDRs from retiring allocations on their existing things? And I think you leave those hanging out there as questions to be considered, but at this point, implementing that into the base proposal, I'd have a hard time with that.
Fair enough.
Good. Okay, I didn't see Joe or Doug's, which came first, but.
Well, I would just say if we were gonna go from 1,000 to 2,000 square feet in the UGB for the bonus, I think it should also accelerate or whatever, like tier 4. So you have to have you're not just extinguishing 500 feet for 1,000. If you're gonna go to 2,000 addition, yeah, extinguish 2,000. It makes it more easy. It makes it more and more difficult to get that square footage. Your proposal was for 1,000 square feet, you gotta extinguish 500 square feet, right? Buy 2 and plus a 500 extinguishment. Well, if you're going all the way to 2,000 addition, you gotta extinguish 2,000. So it's 1 to 1 as opposed to 2 to 1. That makes sense. But it's just like tier 3 and tier 4 in the TDR ratio on the outside of you. Make it harder and harder to get the square footage, more and more expensive, more and more extinction. That's all I have. I think Cliff got a lot of great points about figuring out the market and projecting involvement.
Yeah, I want to protect rural and remote yards. I don't know, maybe I'm only comfortable using these RTDRs for the expanded space in the UGB. I'm not sure. I don't want to require property owners have to buy our TDRs because there may not be any available. So I want to give them an opportunity to expand some other way. But I don't know, I may be in a position where I would support using these only for basement square footage in the UGB.
Morgan.
Just a really quick thing. I mean, I think it's always important to consider a point that Michael brought up earlier, that we just don't live in a rational market here. And so you start selling a few of these and get a little bidding more when they're bidding on the market. And then all of a sudden you have some pretty crazy prices out there. I think the other thing to really consider is that when the TDR program was created, the beauty of it was that it was a massive down zoning. And that this whole square footage trading thing was a carrot given to people to the voters, basically, to accept that down zoning. And so it's something like this, I want to see the way that we be reducing square footage substantially. And, you know, I almost don't even want to say this, but we're dealing with that 5750 number. Could there be some way we could get that down? And this is a carrot given to people. I mean, this is really complicated stuff, and I kind of agree with Debbie on this, but I just want us to all remember that when TDRs were created, so much land was saved when the program was created, because you can only build 1,000 square foot house. You can't build a Montana log cabin. And what we have now are 1,000 square foot cabin that you can't short-term rental, that a lot of people buy. It's a plaything. They forget about it. It's on 10-acre mining claim, you know.
And Morgan, I think what I'm hearing there too is the potential of this concept is to extinguish square footage, you know,
Yeah.
that you see some value in that one, and that's one of the things emerging.
Yeah. Rick, sorry.
I might be looking at this differently, but I think Randy's point in the first place was to look at the community, the character of the community, and try to preserve that. And if somebody has a 3,500 square foot house on Cemetery Lane, and it's possible to go to 5750 within the UGB, whether it's city or county, I don't know the answer. What's the value added of that additional couple thousand square feet in terms of, you know, climate change and capacity and infrastructure and all those services, versus having that property owner perhaps incentivized to put a TDR on it, sell it, and keep maintain that 3,500 square feet. To me, there's a multiplier effect of doing that across the universe here. And I just looking at this thing on the back, attachment B, and imagining that some of these numbers that are in the tier 3 and tier 4 would go down, and some of the numbers in the lower tier would stay where they are. And you would have a double whammy effect there. Not to mention possibly picking up the values and maybe share of community character and growth management and, you know, an urban environment that isn't too dense, but compatible with what's allowed on the fringes. So I think there's other overarching goals here that could be accomplished to this. And this, you know, this, you know, Brian's point, this was an outcome of this discussion we've been having. This wasn't something, this was percolating, I think, for a long time here. Is how do we get to the end game? What are the tools in the toolbox? How many new tools are there? This to me is a really innovative new tool to be able to utilize and also incentivize, make it maybe even make it affordable. To be for a younger family or young people to come in and take one of our retirees out. So, I mean, that's kind of one of the overarching company, you know, shared values I keep hearing about. So, and I think too, it's going to require a lot of cross-pollination with city, IGAs, things like that. They're going to have to have congruent land use programs. Maybe they'll buy off of it. I don't think plopping 6,000 and 7,000 square foot houses down on Cemetery Lane is the right answer, or in Meadowwood, or in Hushman.
It does sound like, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just thinking. I'd rather work this stuff out, you know, and if it takes another meeting or two, that's fine with me. And I know you may not want to hear that or others in the room, but I don't think we ought to just send a report off that says explore this concept. I think we ought to try to figure it out and, you know, debate it and be specific about what the recommendations are.
Well, okay,
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
yeah, I was gonna say, how does the rest of the group feel about this? So let's talk to the folks. Is there anybody that has comments online? I don't see anybody's hands up, but.
Yeah, Sarah just put in the chat a focus group. That was fine.
So I think that's the motion on the table is should we take the time to hash this out, maybe even in a focus group? Or there seems to be some mixed reviews, I think consensus on there's a lot of potential in an innovative program like this, but the devil's in the details and it's gonna take some time to work it all out. Do we work it all out here as part of this process? Do we stay at a high policy level, advance it forward for a work group to explore in the future?
The last meeting, when we separated TDRs from the discussion of constrained sites, scenic, historic, and the TDRs that were given out for that. So that's a conversation we've also postponed that we need to get around to. And I'm all for this, but I think it's half baked right now, and the devil's in the details, and I don't have the details. And I don't really even understand this entirely because it's morphing as we discuss it. So I agree with Debbie, put it in front of me with numbers that I can begin to debate and discuss, fine. I don't mind coming here, we're here every week now. It's, I'm not here June 4th, but you know, I don't know how you're gonna get it all done, so. We're going to 2 days a week.
Yeah, let's go to Jessica, and then I'd love to hear from a staff perspective from there.
Yeah.
Jessica, please.
I was just gonna suggest that we try to move forward on maybe the regular TDR concept. I feel like there's agreement there from this group about protecting rural and remote. I feel really strongly about that. I really agree with kind of the comments that have happened here. I like the idea of the residential TDR for long-term residents. But I share the concerns of how that competes with rural and remote. And I sort of feel like it's the Planner Full Employment Act, right? It adds this level of complexity. When I think about my clients, how do I describe this to them, right? And I'm happy to do it for $300 an hour. But really, is that what we want to be setting up? Okay. And so to me, it needs more conversation, or to just push and say, VOCC, this is a really interesting idea. We'd like you to kind of consider it while staying true to maybe the charge of our committee.
That's good. Thank you. I think that sums up a lot of what we've heard, and I want to hear from Kara, the staff perspective.
I should have like tossed Jessica what I was gonna say. I again highly encourage, I know that I appreciate people's willingness to be here. Also, the charge, remember the goals that the VOCC set out. I will tell you, the VOCC is chomping to get your recommendations. And so encourage, if this is something you all want to see move forward, to Jessica's comment, whether it be a bullet point or two that is part of your recommendations, and if there's a subgroup that wants to fully develop it, that's great. I would really caution about delaying this process any further because of this concept, and letting it move in parallel if this is something you all want to see move forward, not stalling to actually the other aspects as it relates to the goals and the charge of this committee.
Miles,
And Suzanne, I know this is likely to end on P and Z's desk, so I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Miles specifically came to me before the meeting to say, very kindly, just don't say anything. I understand moving it on with a working group of you, but once again, I want to warn you, don't just turn it over to a bunch of sissies, and that's the VOCC. Curious about how this might play itself out, and to do it, because once you turn it over to them, you know, it's gonna lose a lot. Because anytime anybody stands up or yells at them or anything, they run.
Well, and as Suzanne points out, and thank you, Suzanne. I'm glad it was done. But on page 21 and 22, the work groups, that don't just turn this over. Have a task force assigned to oversee the implementation of this. Clearly, there are as many questions as answers. It's a complex proposal. The time it would take to work it out, the VOCC is chomping at the bit. Having this idea and this concept move forward for a work group to dig into after this group does its recommendation, that's what I'm hearing about. But we should take a vote on that.
Yeah, I think we should, because it does feel like there's some kind of mixed ideas, opinions about how to move forward with it. And so, yeah, let's do that. So what's the vote? To continue to talk about it, to recommend it to a working group, and is there another option? High level policy recommendation to go to school.
Right, yeah, I think that's the vote is do we think that we want to advance this forward at a high level? It's a thumbs up. Or do we want a thumbs down and really dig in and hash it out? It's thumbs down. Is that a fair, clear?
No.
We dig in and hash it out is thumbs down,
Mhm.
and thumbs up is left, and that.
High level policy recommendation.
Hold on one sec.
A subgroup.
Do we have the time to dig into this and like get all the details? That's what I'm curious about. I mean, we do have deadlines and
I think it's a
timeline here.
John,
Can I put a motion on the table?
Here, please.
Can we a motion to form a task force to develop and pilot this RTDR program?
Okay, we have a recommendation.
And
Sienna, can you tell us what that really means? How do you envision that?
Do you see that as a working group on our TDRs? Or that's in parallel, or that's a high level of recommendation to go to the county?
Yeah, I personally agree with Debbie and others that I don't think it's the best use of our time, given where we are in the trajectory. But I think if we can recommend that we want to see a task force and we'd like to even see this program piloted, that could ensure it happens past this point.
That's sort of.
So what I'm hearing,
That's the recommendation.
what I'm hearing from Sierra is on page 21 of your recommendation, there's the list of potential working groups that would be formed alongside this recommendation that would go forward. Sarah, I think what I'm hearing is add a task force on this topic to move forward if this group decides that this is a worthy concept that merits further interrogation.
Well, and I use the word pilot too, because I'm trying to make, to Suzanne's point, you know, I don't want it to just be a sissy like recommendation. You know, we want to see this further explored, but maybe we don't have the capacity with all of our commitments to flesh it out right now. So I think, yes, it could be added there easily, or maybe there's some stronger language that can ensure it really gets attention.
And so the pilot concept would be added to the TDR recommendation. I believe it's on page 13 is where TDR starts.
Okay, I'm still not getting the process here. I hear about the task force, but is this task force going to report to this body first or straight to BOCC and P&Z? And did that take place after we're extinguished?
The recommendation, as it sits in the document, is to establish a task force, and it would be a part of this recommendation that would be made by this group that would go to the BOCC, and then when established, that task force would report to the BOCC. That's how I understand it.
Task force, right? It can't P&Z like do this.
Can I ask a question? Would this group be willing to just meet one day to hash this out? And see if we could put some specific recommendations together on this proposal right here?
That's this focus group concept that's.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not quite sure whether this focus group is us or somebody else.
So
I'm saying, can we as a group, this group in this room and online, schedule one additional meeting to hash this out and see if we can come up with some specific recommendations that we could give to the BOCC versus saying, you guys, please just check it out.
That's the group.
I think that's certainly an option that we can put on the table. And we sort of have a vote, but we could go back and we could just say, if ever is there interest in setting up a focus group of members of this committee online and in the room who would delve into this, dive into it, and then come back with a very specific recommendation. But it needs to happen between now and next week. Ideally, we're going to discuss that.
So let me jump in and give kind of a process overview. I think that would help for the decision you all have. So as written in the recommendations, as Miles said, is work groups to set up special review. The process is you all vote on your recommendations, you take those forward to the BOCC. That the BOCC adopts those recommendations. There is an entire amount of work, right, before it goes to P&Z and legislative. That is where those work groups will be set up. Ideally, it's many of you that are part of it, but also we're not in a formal structure. We don't have to call public meetings, right? There are huge benefits to some of this. That is what is set up as the work groups exist right now. The other option on the table that you are discussing is rather than to say, we like the concept of this RTDR and ETR, and we think that the BOCC should establish work groups to pursue it, is option one. Option two that John was putting on the table is you want to dig in one more day and give more specificity to the program and then move it forward. Now, what I will again call back is there is an amount of a high level policy that there is attorney work in here, there is staff work. You don't want to be so specific that then you can't do anything as well, right? And so that is partially why we've set up for the special review. I can't remember what else is in there. These work groups that you're working with staff, it gives us more time to work with the attorneys. We find the flexibility to do it rather than getting too detailed and move it that you aren't as maybe getting the program that you want. This is still ultimately up to you because this is a different level of detail that you all are talking about. But I would say those are the two options on the table that you all need to decide. Do you want to dig in and get more specificity of the program or recommend it and let it move forward through another work group as the BOCC adopts the recommendations?
But more specificity might also mean don't even pursue the program.
Correct.
You know, so I'm with John on this. You know, I think let's just spend another day and hash it out and decide whether we want it or not.
So.
And Sierra, is that what you were thinking too? Can we make a motion up or down vote on should we try to?
Does it have to be the entire group in attendance?
The entire group would need to be invited.
So I've got just, I think I'm kind of picking up on what Sierra's saying, also like what John was saying, but we have a smaller group get together, everybody puts together questions, like in the next couple of days, whatever it is that's bugging you about all this. All good questions, and whatever, there's a group of 5 or 6, or I don't know, however many people want to do it. We get together, try to hash out as much as we can about these questions that are being submitted. And then we talk to the group about, here's what we thought about it, rather than spending all the group time hashing out. Let's have a smaller group, at least think about this stuff, try to flesh out as many answers as we can to the questions, present it to the group, and maybe that'll allow us to get to the next point.
Yeah, I just weighed in, you can't put something that's built on a shifting ground, a moving ground in front of the commissioners, because then it just continues to move. And it does, it gets rehashed and re-looked at, re-examined. Next thing you know, it's down the road ways. So I think the more definition this group gives to the commissioners, the more the addresses Suzanne's concerns. We talked about this yesterday and used the word political capital. And you know, understanding what that is for these guys. If they have a group that comes to them and says, here's definitively what we're trying to do, and this is a new idea, but we really have good ideas to back it up, that suggests that there's some recognition of the political capital here that they're going to gain and they follow through with some of this stuff.
And I think everybody's starting to say the same thing on this one. Right?
Can I ask 2 questions? One, is there anybody in the room here that is opposed to the idea of allowing residents to create TDRs by setting aside their 1 or 2 chunks of 500 square feet, regardless of what they're called? Okay, because to me, that's a threshold question, right? And so I'll ask the second question, which is there anybody in this room or on the call that is opposed to the concept of allowing extinguishment of TDRs? Nobody. So at least there, we've got a consensus that this should be your recommendation going forward.
You know, I'm sorry, can I ask, just add to Brian's question? I think that there's a next level to your second question, which is beyond allowing the extinguishment, it's requiring the extinguishment. So that's what that extinguishment piece does in tier 3 and tier 4 that I think, Cliff, I don't hear you appreciating or recognizing perhaps when you talk about moving it from one place to the next, moving 1,000 square feet from here to there. There is in tier 3 and tier 4 a requirement that in tier 3 that you extinguish an additional 500 square feet beyond that transfer of 1,000. And in tier 4, there's a 1,000-foot extinguishment above and beyond the transference of 1,000 square feet. So you, in tier 3 and tier 4, you are seeing a reduction in square footage in both cases that would not be just moving it from one place to another. Thank you, Alex. Those are the examples. So I'm feeling that is not being recognized within the conversation we're having. Brian, you asked 2 great questions. I just want to add a third point, which is in tier 3 and tier 4, we're talking about requiring an extinguishment of additional square footage beyond the transference of the square footage.
So first, let's agree that extinguishment as a concept is something we find acceptable. And then, Michael, we can move on to saying how much extinguishment for what activity are we going to require? And I think if you're going to have extinguishment of TDRs being embedded somewhere in here, you've got to come up with some additional supply in order to sustain the market. And that's why I would say I'm all for allowing existing residents to create TDRs by agreeing to voluntarily forego their development rights. And I think you start to get a single working market that makes a lot of sense. And you're at a point where you can say, and we recommend that these things be incorporated into the design of the program. And maybe we don't need to meet for an entire day to figure out what and how and where, because according to Kara, we're going to get to do that anyway.
That's a good point. What I'm concerned about, or maybe not concerned, but I just feel that we have a proposal to create a focus group, and it seems to me that we could potentially hand these parameters off to this focus group who could refine this concept, because now we have some sense of a couple of different things that could come back to the group, or do we not need this focus group any longer? And I just want to, before we decide not to have it, it feels like there was quite a bit of energy for a focus group to hammer out the process just a little bit more.
I cannot support this until there's more detail. That's why I gave the thumbs down. In the big picture, I can live with it. But I haven't heard anyway yet that you're protecting rural and remote, that this program won't compete with it. When I hear an answer to that, then I can support it.
And I think that brings us back to the motion that Mona's bringing up is there interest to have a focus group and move this forward with the threshold parameters that we just established that Brian so clearly brought up. Bill.
I wouldn't use Suzanne's language, but we're charged with bringing them back or bringing to them proposals, specific things. And if anything is left open-ended, they're either just going to drop it or say, well, what have you guys been doing for the last 16 weeks or however many weeks? I think we need to be as precise about this as we possibly can.
And Bill, so I hear you're in favor of a focus group to hash this out.
I think so.
This.
Something
So
like
that's a motion on the table.
Yeah, I think so. It seems like we should call.
My concern about the focus group is it takes 2 meetings. You have the focus group and then everybody comes back and we're all here and we hear what they said. And then we have the same meeting that we had already. Focus group, because the people that weren't part of the focus group then want to weigh in. And the conversations that come from the group is questions that are generated. We can all think about questions. Then we're not there and we hear it. And then so it takes the focus group and then a full meeting, in my mind. As opposed to just saying.
And there is the.
Anybody got a TDR?
It varies.
Exactly.
Hey, guys, we if you all start talking, those of us online, we can't follow. It just turns into white noise. Chris and Tim have their hands up.
Hi, thank you. So I just have a quick question about the level, maybe kind of defining the level of specificity that we want to achieve to address, kind of both what we heard from Kara and what we've heard from others about, concerns if we're not specific enough, it might not go anywhere. And I guess what I would suggest is looking to, kind of like what happens in state policy in terms of legislative intent as a good threshold. So that is defining what we want to achieve and adding a certain level of specificity, but not having to go through, extensive legal and technical review. And I think that's what we're talking about. But it just seems like figuring out what that looks like would help us make the decision of whether a subcommittee is appropriate or whether we need an extra day. And what would kind of work well to get the outcome we want. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm just wondering if we have a focus group and if we're just not going to repeat going around in a circle and not resolve this. Can we direct staff, give them the positions? We like the idea of both these TDR systems. Would you figure out for us a way in which these don't compete? And so we direct staff to come up with a solution for this problem.
Are you saying don't compete or priority?
Do you want to weigh in on that one?
Cindy made a point to Tim. Go ahead and ask him.
Just really quickly, I think that the real issue that I'm hearing on the table is you like all the programs, but you want to prioritize conservation in the rural and remote. So it's really a question of prioritizing versus not competing. And I think that's where Randy kind of started off, trying to figure out a way to make all those work together. but since I have the floor, if it's okay, in this attachment A, what we tried to do at the very bottom, there's an underlying question.
Which page?
I'm sorry, there's not a page number. It's
It's
attachment
about
A.
6 in.
It's attachment A, and it is the third page at the bottom, right under the red. There's a high level policy statement here that I'm wondering if you guys had a chance to look at and if you can live with that. And a question right on top of it that's underlined about 3/4 of the way down the page. It says the question for the committee is whether they like the concept and if it should be recommended that the BOCC and P&Z explore it further. And then it goes on to specifically give you a high-level policy statement that hopefully captures what you're trying to have them do, which is, you know, we see value in the reimagining and expanding of the TDR program by financially incentivizing existing residents to reduce their homes' future developable square footage. And the program could help local residents free market housing. The concept rewards being a long-term community member, long-term homeowner, and can derive cash from this and hopefully in another way, you know, incentivize that economy. It could enable residents to transfer their ownership and all of the benefits that Randy's told us about. Additionally, this new approach creates a market that requires a portion of TDRs be extinguished. Whereas TDRs normally move development from one location to the other. This is actually purchasing and extinguishing that square footage relative to the impacts that that can create. I think this says everything you want to say, except that you want to prioritize in this whole program that rural and remote TDRs have priority.
And how do we do that?
We just add a sentence to that high level statement and we move on. You say, yep, that's what we want to tell the board, and we move on. And then, like Kara said, there is a focus group formed later in the process. Does that work for people? Because that's what we really tried to hone into here. Thank you. You tried to draw my attention to it. Does that work if we add the statement that we want to prioritize? No.
I'm sure.
No, okay, no.
It's still missing the detail of how do you prioritize rural and remote? It's a value thing. You got two markets. They're gonna be, are they open markets or are they fixed markets? Meaning each TDR has fixed value versus, you know, there's a lot of ways to look at it.
We're gonna figure that out in one work session, Clint. I think this is big and I think it's gonna take a lot of time. Personally, I spent a lot of time with the numbers on the supply and demand side. This is deep and it's gonna take a lot of work. So
I agree with that.
if you can't buy off on it, I get that, you know, but I think that this priority statement, this policy, high level policy statement gets us down the road and that work has to be done, Suzanne, before we hand it over, before there can be any shaky ground underneath it. So that's just my 2 cents in the work that we tried to put together to get you guys to a place where you didn't have to figure out all these details.
And I think, Cindy, one other thing we discussed as doing that is that we could include, you know, the specifics and the examples by tiers as examples, not as here's a prescriptive path that we would like you to follow, but just to say, as we beat on this and tried to imagine what it would look like, this is an iteration of what it might look like that we understand needs further analysis and an understanding of what's the delta of square footage that could be built that's out there that the residents would be putting on the table and the potential demand for it based on all of the other parameters and overlays and restrictions on how many TDRs can land in certain places and how those two things reconcile.
And I do think we need to keep this conversation moving. I hear there is not consensus on this, and staff is happy to convene a focus group, notice a meeting of a task force of this group to work through this, so it can be brought back next week and voted on as an individual line item on whether or not the policy statement moves forward. Is that a acceptable proposal to move us onward?
Why don't we vote on it right now?
Yeah, let's vote.
Yeah,
Vote on
let's
that.
vote on it.
Or the policy statement.
The policy.
Well, there was a motion, so.
Well,
We had the one from Sierra.
that's
That was the task force. Now you're asking for a vote on the policy statement.
And maybe there's a way to hybridize this a little bit to say, should we convene a task force to develop a policy statement to bring forward for this group to vote on next week? Is that a clear enough?
Yeah.
Action? So, Mona, do you
Yeah.
support?
I support
Is
that.
there gonna be detail?
There is gonna be a high level policy statement.
And then you all can decide if you want to move it forward or not based on the information that you have.
Are high level policy statements the limit of what we're forwarding to the BOCC? Like a lot of the specifics that are in these white papers and the numbers are we generally not going to include that in our final report?
I think it would be included as like, here's the example of how we could see, it's illustrative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the attachment that Michael and Mona described, attachment A in your packet, could be an accompaniment if the group votes it forward to include in the recommendation. That level of detail should be included.
Yeah, because my concern would be that we would be high level here and then way more specific in other areas, and I would just like to see it be consistent regardless of issue.
Yeah.
So we can vote on this idea, and I mean. I feel like we should call the question here, just to vote on this focus group, see if there's interest, and then people have to attend and participate in the focus group. If you're really interested in it, if there's something you want to be part of. Yes, so.
Well, what we're thinking of is a marketplace. For example, there was no clue that there would be a marketplace for the TDRs when it came up for the first time. So there was a risk and a gain. And here again, we have a risk and a gain. We're creating two different markets, and we're trying to determine if they'll both have substance and life and energy to them. The one for the original rural and remote, we know they're going to still have an attraction. It's this other one that are TDRs. It'll be a new marketplace, is what it'll be.
Right. That regardless, I think that where there is consensus amongst this group, there would need to be some sort of task force to oversee the implementation of that. So,
Yeah, that would be a follow-up to this group.
exactly.
So let's just take a vote and let's just ask the question. And how many people are in favor of this focus group that are going to develop this high-level policy around our TDRs and TDRs and come back to us next week? And actually, we would need something quickly to put into a packet. So raise your thumb if you're in favor of it, raise your thumb up. And let's see what we get.
If we get folks online, turn on their cameras. Seeing a lot of abstaining.
You're in the middle.
Well, it was just about.
Only ask for up.
Right, so I think the motion on the table to clarify is if you're in favor of forming a focus group to develop a high level policy statement with, I like the addition that Chris and Sierra have some design principles for what a pilot program might look like for the group to react to next week. That is up. If you're not in favor of forming a focus group to advance this concept, down. Straight yes or no.
And also just to sort of, Miles, be clear, voting no for the focus group could mean voting yes for hammering this out and getting it done per Jono's suggestion and Glenn's suggestion, correct? And that's why I'm voting no. I think it's so close, and I kind of feel like what Brian said, you know, backing off and what Suzanne said and leaving it sort of high level policy statement leaves it.
Can I
My perception is that giving a thumbs up to this is continuing the conversation and putting a little bit more work in it so that we can give a more specific recommendation. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. That's how I read it.
And no is you're not advancing this.
Correct.
Okay, okay. Then-
It just- So yes, you're advancing, we'll have a focus group. No is you're not advancing and it ends tonight.
Thank you,
We're gonna
Kara. Okay.
simplify.
And that depends on people's willingness to participate.
And advancing, it means we're advancing the to market solution. Our TDRs and TDRs.
Yes, yes. For further development to come back pretty well.
Are we voting? I don't think people.
I have,
Clear.
I think Randy and I have been convincing over here a little bit. If the two market thing and the competition thing just doesn't cut it, in some level, because there's a market for rural remote ranch estate projects, family compounds, whatever it is, and then there's a market for urban escapees that want to come to a metropolitan area and live, which would be the UGB. So I see two distinct zones. And maybe that turns into two markets, but there's a rural remote and then there's UGB. And to me, it's pretty simple that you have these rules, GFQS, TDRs out in the rural remote to preserve the rural character. Then you have capacity issues inside the UGB with infrastructure and schools and hospitals and all that stuff. So those things, if someone wants to move from New York City and they want to build a 6,000 square foot house on Cemetery Lane, that creates a problem within the UGB. If somebody comes from the outside there to build out in the rural remote, it's already seemed to be capped at 9750, unless they want to go down the path of TDRs, or in this case, I think we're talking about also including them in the GQMS, growth management code system. Like what we were pointing towards was the TDR was an escape route to get extra square footage without going through GMQS, but now there's been some discussion about utilizing GMQS too. Maybe I missed that vote, but.
So I think this is what the special meeting focus group would debate.
Yeah.
And John, I think
I'm
you
just trying to clarify that the special focus group is really only focused on UGB.
No.
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 And Randy,
TDRs, no.
I think we're overcomplicated.
mentioned the TDRs could be received, the R TDRs could be received anywhere. That was
It's universal, but universal within the UGB.
what he suggested. What you just suggested is an entirely different thing. So there's, you were kibitzing, but you kind of missed
So the
that.
motion on the table that's been amended and clarified, and John, will correct me if I get this wrong, is do we call a special meeting to work this out and get it to a level of detail where everyone's comfortable? If that is your thumbs up, or do we just kill it now? Thumbs down. So.
So what's
The detail is the issue.
So
So
can
Miles,
we
what you would do,
simplify this? We're gonna take 5 different votes. Do you want to continue to have this conversation or is it dead in the water tonight? Let's just do a vote.
That is the vote.
Okay, are we doing a focus group to continue the conversation and to come back to you tomorrow, next week?
prior to the meeting, a week from today.
Yes,
And you're gonna invite everybody in the room to
Yes.
come, and anybody comes that wants to come.
Special
You're
meeting.
not required, it's just a special
Yes,
session.
that's right.
yes.
And there will be detail, yeah.
And that will come back to all of you for a final vote. Okay, so we'll have a special meeting. There you go. Is there any other questions or confusion that we need to work through?
Why don't you figure right now, when that's gonna be up there soon.
Special meeting.
I think we're gonna.
Next one.
Yeah.
I think we need to take a break.
Let's
Yeah,
move
I think you need to move it on to that.
Let's move on to the next topic.
Buying a house in the
And so, Mona, I think this,
So how are you gonna handle it?
the scheduling of the meeting.
Yeah.
We'll get with the co-chairs and notice a meeting and as many people who can be there.
And are you expecting that meeting to come up with some more stuff like this? Or are you expecting that meeting group to come up with specific recommendations for the county?
I would say it's up for the group to meet and decide what they want to bring forward to the committee to vote.
Yeah, and I think anybody who's really interested in seeing more detail, if you can join this meeting, that would be really helpful, because so we can have some more specific. Okay, So now we're gonna move on to redevelopment and have that conversation, huh?
And the redevelopment conversation should tee us off really well from TDR. So the 13th page of your scenario has the TDR section, and the last question on TDRs has to do with redevelopment. And that is on page 15, the final portion of the TDR segment. So the discussion question here is, can TDRs be used for the redevelopment of square footage to maintain current house size for non-conforming to new requirements? And the co-chairs have put together a proposed recommendation to answer that question that's consistent with this group's decision on applying the tiering system and performance and development standards to redevelopment. Everybody with me so far? And so Mona, do you want to read that proposed recommendation?
Sure.
Which page are you reading from on?
The recommendation isn't in the packet. It's a motion from the co-chairs to answer this question. So it's verbal.
So we would allow redevelopment of existing square footage above what will be allowed under the new code allowable FAR cap. And that would be subject to the square footage quota system or the TDR program above the FAR or house size cap. And if you wanted to scrape or replace outside of the existing footprint, it would be considered new development subject to the new code.
Could you read that one more time, please?
Yeah. So we can't put this up, okay?
Yeah, you paste it up there. You've got to be able to do it.
Yeah.
I don't, where is that?
It's in the facilitation guide.
Okay, I'm working on it.
It's a little complicated. So redevelopment of existing square footage above what will be allowed under the new code, the allowable FAR cap or the cap will be subject to the square footage quota system or the TDR program above the FAR or house size cap. And then this, if you wanted to scrape and replace outside of the existing footprint, that would be considered new development subject to the new code.
So Mona,
Miles, can you shift that? Part of it.
Yeah, someone can.
So Mona, this redevelopment clause would only kick in if I had a non-conforming structure under the new limits, correct?
If you had
If I had a 72,
12,000.
if I had a 7250 on a 5750 lot and I wanted to redevelop it as 7250. Then what you're describing would kick in. I would need to do TDRs, I would need to go through GNQS or whatever. Right? But if I had 5750 on a 5750 lot, this would not apply. I could redevelop. Okay.
Right.
What if you have 12, not 8750?
Then you could redevelop to 12 if you got the TDRs and went through the hoops.
And you tear it down though.
Then it's brand new. Then
Brand new.
it's brand new and you're capped out.
It's brand new.
Yeah. I like that.
Currently,
Especially if we have to extinguish some TDRs.
so currently, I think the background is that the way Brian described it, if I've got a non-conforming structure size, my floor area is limited to 5,000 square feet, but I've got an 8,000 square foot 1970s house, tear down the 1970s house and build back the 8,000 square feet. It's still non-conforming. So that's kind of the way it is now. So these are big changes that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and to that scenario, you'd only be able to build it back to the FAR house size cap limit. You wouldn't get back to the full 8,000.
No, you would, well, you could.
You could if you then got
By
your other stuff.
TDRs or
Right,
we're actually, I think what they're saying is. We're allowing you to continue this non-conforming structure size,
Mhm.
but you're gonna have to give some to the community to be able to do that.
Right.
Whereas today, you don't, you just get to do it.
So this would be a new requirement.
Yeah, I mean, a harder line would be to say, if you're doing redevelopment, then you're under the new rules, sorry, end of story.
That might be a little bit of a challenge, but yeah, we've got Forrest online. So if you could, Boris, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, does the redevelopment only pertain to demolition and a rebuild? Because what we would definitely want to steer away from, in my opinion, is forcing people to demo a certain amount of their square footage just to become conforming. We don't want to force demolition, we want to prevent demolition.
You know, I believe if you've got an existing house and it would remain as is until you wanted to either redevelopment or do some kind of major remodel. So, yeah. Okay, Joe?
No, I'm not excited about attacking rights that have already been established, so. If someone has an 8,000 square foot house, I don't wanna say, well, if you wanna do anything to that, you have to go back to 5750 and spend a bunch of money to get back to that, so. I wanna acknowledge what people already have.
And so you would say they could build back to.
Yeah, it's the one area I would reconsider if we're talking about a scrape and replace. I thought the language was outside the footprint.
Scrape and replace outside of existing footprints.
Yeah, I could support that.
And one important clarification too, that I know we as a group talked about, that, you know, getting back to that, there's two pathways. It's the TDR pathway, but also that square footage quota system where it doesn't require you to buy anything, but just go through the system. And then Nick and Jessica.
Yeah.
I had maybe a question of what we mean by redevelopment. Does that mean I'm demolishing? I'm actually doing a scrape and replace, but I'm using the exact same footprint. And that's what the first clause means. So I can tear off part of my home or I can tear down the entire home. And either way, I can build back to what was my floor area by buying a TDR or going to it.
Correct.
Okay, correct. Thank you.
And there are the definitions on page 20 too, for redevelopment additions and remodel.
And if there's a clarification to that sentence that would better answer that, Jessica, let us know, because I'm sure many others have that question.
Okay. Anybody else? Is there anybody else?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if I understand that correctly, so if you scrape and just replace with the exact same footprint, you still have to purchase a TDR or go through the process to get back to 8,000 square feet. That, no.
So
People are not even shaking their heads.
No.
Okay.
No.
only if, let's
Change
say,
the footprint.
yeah.
Okay, so, one thing I'd like to caution about that is like, if you have, there are some structures out there, existing stock that is underperforming. It might be really inefficient, it needs replacement, and there might be a small addition or shift to the footprint that you might want to make, and requiring an additional however many millions of dollars to do that. When you supposedly, as the Joe thing, you had that square footage that was legally built previously. That seems to disincentivize people from going through the brain damage financial work to redevelop their house or to tear something down that is in poor shape. Because if you're going through that effort to tear something down, you're probably going to want to make a few adjustments to it, reasonable adjustments. And maybe a compromise might be, let's say you're at 8,000, 9,000 square feet or whatever, you retain the right to build up that square footage, but then you're put into the tier 3, tier 4 category, where then you're triggered to meet performance standards, meet these other standards, but retain the right that you have had previously, because I think this is just going to disincentivize people from improving structures that really ought to be improved, that have the capital to do it, but are going to be disincentivized if this is adopted in its current form.
Maybe we'll incentivize them to build smaller though.
It could, the reverse side is how could you incentivize them to build smaller? And I think that's where linking it into the tiered system is potentially a way to have that overlap. And then maybe even not creating TDRs, man, but if you sell a TDR, you say you can have a 9,000 square foot home, really, I just want to build a 5,000 square foot home. I don't know. That was half joking.
This is more of kind of a technical piece in terms of thinking about your definition, like, what does footprint mean? Is that just my house? Is it my hardscape? My hardscape's not conforming, can I build that back? And so just having some clarity around what you mean there.
Oh, I agree with Nicholas. I think to do this, what it would impede from someone from changing the footprint. I just can't see going there and having to get a TDR to do that. So I wouldn't support that. And one of the things, if you put that language back up there, one of the things that's like confuses me is we're kind of loose with the definitions of floor area and floor area ratio. And I think we need to use the definitions properly in this recommendations, especially because we're going to have floor area ratios. So when we're talking about floor area limits, let's say floor area limits and not floor area ratio limits, because it's going to get confusing when we have floor area ratios as a recommendation, or if they get adopted. And they're different. There's a ratio, floor to area ratio, and then there's floor area limitations. So I think it's important that we call it the right thing so that people don't get confused by it. Because a lot of people will just throw out FAR and floor area like they're the same, and they're really not.
And that runs through all the documents. The use of floor area ratio when it's not really a floor area ratio.
It's just become a common term.
Exactly.
Yeah, but now we have a floor area ratio, so we need to use it the right way.
So adding in.
Yeah, it's an
glossary
editing
terms.
thing, but you know, we should really use it properly because there's a floor area ratio recommendation.
Thumbs up on that. This is one of my deals, I guess, is demos and scrape and replace. And what we're seeing in our subdivisions that we run, scrape and replace, and the homes are being built at the same size that were there, and they're also being built in a process which allows them to kind of get around, not get around maybe, but look at site constraints. You know, we're under severe water restrictions in Brush Creek, and we cannot support, you know, 80 houses or 120 houses over the next 20 or 30 years getting scraped and replaced with bigger homes. It's just not possible. So somewhere in communication to potential buyers and investors is going to be the suggestion that, you know, if you want to buy here, if you want to buy there, here are your limits to infrastructure, capacity, roads, all that stuff. We're already experiencing some issues with redevelopment in a couple of neighborhoods that are really going to be crushing to the existing systems. So I think it's a hard line for sure, but there's always a way to get around it, it seems, at the end of the day, if you do the right thing. And if somebody wants to really put back into the community and, you know, what to offset whatever it might be creating in terms of impact, then that's looked at too. But, you know, this is a big deal. Redevelopment is probably the biggest market open right now in this whole valley.
So
For a general population, not for the people that want to build out the rural, remote, or the state compound type of deal with billionaires behind it. It's a total, you know, $3 or $4 million a year operation, but people that want to redevelop in Little Elk Creek, Brush Creek, Meadowwood, Starwood, wherever it might be, that's gonna be an intense market for activity.
Great, so you're supportive of this?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Debbie, that's your-
Just a clarification question, what happens if somebody wants to build even bigger, say they've got 8,500 square feet and they want to go to the maximum limit, which of course we haven't determined yet, but or, you know, is that allowed, or is it just hard and fast? No, you can only build to what you got. You can't go beyond that, or if you're gonna go beyond that, it's a total redevelopment.
I think the simple answer is you can go up to whatever the cap is or the floor area ratio limit, I use the term properly on that one. Yeah.
The floor area limit,
Whatever's the most restrictive.
whatever's the most restrictive.
Or your
yeah.
caucus.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So in-
Caucus rules, right.
And the redevelopment, what we're really talking about is someone that is non-conforming under the proposal that you all are moving towards.
Right. Okay. So, but are they considered non-conforming? If the limit is 5750 and they've got an 8,000 square foot house, they're considered non-conforming. All right, but if they want to go to, say, we say 90, whatever,
No.
9750, then can they do that, or can they just build to what they've already got?
Depends what their floor area ratio limit.
Floor area limited.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes, so if their floor area limit is 10,000, then yes, they could build to the extra 1,000 and they can do it through TDR or through the square footage allocation system. If their floor area limit is 7,000, then they're non-conforming no matter what, and they can't build with that.
And Nick, I know you've got your card up. I'm Sarah, I know you had your hand up, but it's down now. Any comment?
Oh, I had another point. I wanted to make sure we wrapped up this recommendation before I make my other redevelopment recommendation.
We'll come back.
So one other thing that you said, that maybe think about something, to complete this, the requirements a little differently. So if you have, say you have a 6,000 square foot home, it's non-conforming. I would still stand by my argument and say that we should still allow that 6,000 square feet without requiring redevelopment. But say you wanted to go to 8,000, you're allowed to go to 8,000. Then you have to buy all the TDRs, get back down to 5750 from scratch as if it were a new development. That's what would trigger what's currently in there, in my opinion. So you try to keep this house size the way it is, but you don't penalize people for redeveloping that to fix a underperforming home or whatever it is. But then the group wants to try to restrict larger and larger homes and moving into those other tiers, maybe for existing homes, try to incentivize just keeping that house size the way it is. But if people want to go larger, then you make it so you have to buy all the TDRs from ground zero, basically.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
And I believe that is the intent of what
Yeah,
this describes.
that's.
Right, so I'm trying to I don't know, find a compromise between what I find problematic with this, but then also trying to retain what I think the intent of the group's decision was in forming that.
Yeah, and if it's helpful on page 10, the decision that this group made that we based this recommendation off of was that applying the tiered system to all redevelopment of more than 500 square feet of manageable floor area, that the tiers would apply. Performance standards, development standards to incentivize any redevelopment to upgrade to the highest level of performance standards. Mona, you want to make a motion to advance this language forward, and maybe we should leave it up if we're going to be voting on whether or not to include this language or amend it for the recommendation.
Somebody has a question online. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna start with, I apologize that I'm saying that. But if I look at the definition of remodel.
On
it's
page 20.
Down to page 20, it says properties that are not adding square footage to the existing building envelope. And so. That's the scenario that I thought that that language applied to, is where I'm scraping it, but I'm not adding more square footage. And so again, it's just about, please be clear on what we are meaning with this, because I'm comfortable kind of with where we're going of, I'm scraping it, but I'm not adding, I'm keeping with my building footprint, and I have to go through my TDR and all of this stuff. But with this definition, that would be a remodel. It would not be remodel.
My understanding is a remodel is not a scrape.
And
Is that accurate? I don't know.
And I'm going to ask maybe Ellen, who might know what's in the code. Ellen, I hate to put you on the spot.
I could do that when it came out of the building code. So the three definitions that are placed there, the redevelopment, addition, and remodel, those are specific building census codes that we use. We report those to the federal government. And so that is how we track those types of building permits. Scrape and replace, where you're working within your existing, tearing it down and building that up, that's captured under a redevelopment permit. Remodel is you're working within your existing square footage, you are not adding, so it's a 5,000 square foot home, you're only working on those 5,000. There is no increase to that. The addition permit is if I have a 5,000 square foot home and I want to add 1,000, that is how that permit type is tracked. And then the remodel is just 5,000 square feet, remodeling 5,000 square feet. So those are the definitions we pulled that are placed there.
And I think that there is often a difference between building code and land use code. And so I'm just saying that as we move forward to Glenn's point as well, like what is floor area ratio, what is floor area? We just need to be so clear about what we are doing.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's such a good transition into that second bullet in redevelopment that Alex has up here and will highlight in the left-hand column, that aligning the definitions and thresholds used in the building code with those used in the land use code for redevelopment additions and remodels so that they're synced up. That.
Good luck.
Thank you. It's a recommendation.
Well, this is very clear. I'm still not clear on these terms.
Yeah.
May I say something?
Well,
Hello?
Yeah.
The city code is that a remodel is anything less, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, it's anything less than 40% of the exterior. If anything more than 40% is changed, that is a redevelopment. If it's under 40%, it's a remodel and it does not require a demo permit.
I just want to remind us all, we're talking about the county code, correct, Alex? Not the city.
So what else?
Saying that's an example, but.
It's an example and it may be a way to apply apples to apples.
In this case.
The building envelope in this is under the roof. You're not popping the roof, you're not doing that. That's what the remodel is, not the building envelope that's drawn on the plaque.
Not popping the roof, I like that, though.
Yeah, so you're not raising the height or doing something like that. That's what this building envelope is. It's a thermal envelope. It's not the plaque.
Oh, you're right, because otherwise it would probably call it an activity.
Yeah, that's another source of confusion.
So you're right, I was just reading that. That does help me clarify that. Yeah, I mean, it says building on over, so I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that is.
Okay.
And then see Alex nodding his head, who's our resident code expert. So what we've got in here is correct.
It's the building. Okay.
The building code.
Yeah.
And aligning those two.
Yeah.
Good, with the best of luck.
Okay.
Tim, does that address your point too? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
I'm not sure what addressed my point. There's a lot of communication going back and forth.
Okay, sorry about that. We were just aligning on the definitions on page 20 for the county building code. And I think in the room, we've got some consensus that everything is correct.
Is that what you've got highlighted here?
Nope.
No.
I don't know who's sharing.
Under rationale on page 20.
Right here, highlighted here, Tim.
Can you try to make that a little bigger for us online? Thanks.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
And Stira?
Yes, hello. One of my biggest concerns with redevelopment is the landfill capacity that's being quickly maxed out, and I don't feel like that's adequately addressed in our recommendations yet. But what about a simple recommendation to incentivize the reuse and repurposing of all materials? So kind of create a market out of these used materials to kind of keep them out of the landfill. There's a lot of cool stuff that's being done in Europe with this. So yeah, that's it. I have another one around composting, but I realize this is the wrong spot.
Under performance development standards.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it's a really good point about reusing materials and recycling and repurposing.
And where do we address that?
And Kara did find it. It's page 7.
There's some around development standards. And so I guess, yeah, just a clarification of, is this in addition to what's here? Or does this capture what you?
Correct. In addition, I think if there was a real effort made on behalf of the county to incentivize this for developers, that there could be, it would really slow the pace of the growth of the landfill. And also, you know, spur some creativity, I hope.
So Sierra, I think that's a good incentive to add. Anyone concerned with adding that incentive to the development standards?
I'm not concerned. Support it. That's
Support it.
my underlying goal here of saying what I did about redevelopment was to meet that goal of, you know, recycle, landfill. I see just as much demo coming off of the site that I see in new construction sometimes. And there's just as much waste when they build a new house as when they tear down a two thousand photos. So, you know, the whole thing kind of combines to be an effective tool.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's opposed to her addition to that bullet, correct? Okay, great.
Should we take us back to formalizing that recommendation on, and Alex, if you could bring that up one more time, I apologize for the Zoom jujitsu.
Before we get too far, can I ask, Nick, I was really following everything you said. I was really agreeing with everything you said. I wanted to know, now that we've gone back through the room, how much of what's here are you agreeing with and how much are you still thinking needs to adjust?
I think for me, the thing that I would like to see adjusted is to not require TDRs to be purchased to retain the same square footage that you have for redevelopment or remodel or whatever that definition is. Because again, I think that it disincentivizes people from upgrading their home and then doing a slight altercation to their footprint, maintaining the same square footage. They're just shifting stuff around. I think that's an important thing to think about when we're talking about all the existing stock. There's actually a lot of poorly built, poorly performing buildings out there that people would, it's going to be more efficient to scrape the whole thing. That is to try to retain it just in code, just to not buy TDR.
And that's why I asked that. I think I agree. After you explain that, I think I agree 100%. And it's a tough dilemma because I see what Sierra's saying and the fact that we're creating more waste in the landfill. But I guess because I'm there building, I see huge benefits from these old structures. As much as we're creating waste, on the opposite side, it's a much better structure. I mean, you can't even imagine what we're getting into on these remodels, what they look like. And you're right, to make a little remodel on one side and have the insulation a little bit better on 500 square feet compared to the whole envelope, especially the roof. Like I've said before, 70% of the heat goes out of the roof, right? So we talk about not wanting to tear off a roof because that's kind of a redevelopment and it creates all this waste. But it's amazing the performance of a house when you do that. Couple that with all the new things we're going to put into implementation for when we, you know, go this next step, especially in these tiers, you're going to have amazing equipment to run that. So I think I'm with you. And the second part of the reason I think I'm with you there, Nick, is something about this in the back of my mind, as much as we all want to just kind of reduce the square footage, reduce the usage around here, it feels like a bit of a takings to me. And I want to make sure that we see this from the eyes of not just the people in this room, but the people who own those properties. And if I was one of those people, it feels like a takings, and maybe legally it's not, we can get around that. Something about it just doesn't quite feel right to me if they already have something. And I realize rights can expire and all that, but I'm not, as you can tell, I'm kind of working through this as we go through this, but I think I'm leaning towards what Nick's saying. That makes a lot of sense to me personally.
Okay. John.
I just want to share a different opinion. I think I understand the taking, and I understand that building technology has gotten way better than it is. And that remodeling a house, better insulation and better building materials makes it more efficient. But I am not for giving people the right to have a huge house to continue to have a huge house. I think we should be incentivizing in any way we can that everyone is under the same. Moving forward, the idea is we're really trying to incentivize people to build smaller homes. And if they need to get back to their original square foot of what they were granted earlier, then they got to go through some hoops.
And that's what I do like about it, is it does help the TDR program in more landing sites. So that was the one thing that really swayed me when I first saw this. My biggest worry, of course, as everybody knows, is having enough landing sites for that and creating a market. So I could be swayed to think that way because of that.
I mean, I think what a cool notion that somebody that 15 or 20 years ago built a 15,000 square foot home and they're thinking of redoing it, and they decided to go to 7,000. I mean, to me, that would be a super win-win. And all these things we're talking about, energy and greenhouse gas. And everything.
Yeah, and I think when you're ready, I think we can take a vote on it. And one thing I just want to remind everyone too, that as it says here, if we could just move the screen up a little bit, it's not just having to purchase something in a TDR, even though to your point, it does stimulate that market. There's also the square footage quota system pathway too. So you have both pathways to get there.
And I think what Nick suggested was meeting the tier 3 or tier 4 criteria as well.
Yeah, and you must, yeah, and that was one of the decisions that we've made as a group, that the tiering
So it kind
criteria
of is
apply.
one, I think, John, where you're one, right?
There's a couple of hands up though. Tim, is your hand still up? Or is that from your previous comment?
No, my hand's not up. No.
Okay, how about you, Sierra? Except that you, but
I can lower it for you, Tim, don't worry.
Sierra, is your hand up or no?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just ran for a bio break. No, my hand is not up.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe we should bring Nick's proposal into the scenario. So what it would, if I'm saying it correctly, is that you're proposing that under redevelopment, that a house that would qualify for it's the existing square footage of a house would be able to build back the same square footage without a TDR requirement? Okay. So, can we,
I think that's the motion on the floor.
that's the motion on the floor, right?
During a vote, the motion is made and the vote happens before any more discussion.
Yeah, so everybody in favor of revising this and including it under redevelopment, please raise your hand. So. Okay. Okay, you can live with it. Let's count. Can you just keep them up so we can count, please? 6. Okay, so we've got 6 people and then 7 online and Sierra and Tim, 8. Is that right?
Thought about all this.
Well, that's for no votes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody who is opposing this proposal, please raise your hand. So amended, the amended proposal. Yeah.
So it's just to use,
It's just to eliminate.
ignore TDRs if you're building back a non-conforming structure in size.
That's- and you can just
I don't know.
do that. Okay, so
It should be TDRs too.
I'm so sorry. Would you mind repeating the motion?
yeah, that's what, okay. So do you want to restate it, Nick?
So. If you have a non-conforming, but legally built square footage.
Great standout.
As an example. To go to the extreme, then you don't have to purchase additional TDRs to make up for that difference between 5750 and wherever you're at.
I think I can maybe clarify, and Alex, if we could bring it up, in the proposal that was on the table, redevelopment of existing square footage above what would be allowed under the new code, allowable under the floor area limit or the house size cap, would be subject to, would not, is the amendment you're wanting to make here, would not be subject to square footage quota system or TDR program to get back to that size. Is that?
Yeah.
So you're saying not, just to be
You would
clear.
not require a TDR for
Yeah.
square footage.
So we're flipping this to the opposite, that instead of being required to have a TDR or go through the square footage quota system to get to your existing square feet, you would not be required. You're there. Sure.
Okay, do we,
Cliff, any clarification before we vote? Because once we vote, we're gonna vote and we're all gonna be clear on what the vote is.
So it occurred to me a different scenario would be I have a 10,000 square foot house and the house cap gets dropped below what I'm building. Can I rebuild? Do I still not need a TDR? And can I even build above the cap once that cap goes in place?
Yes, you can. And the question on the table is, do you need a TDR square footage quota system to get there or not? Or are you grandfathered? Is that a fair?
Clarification, you said build, you can only rebuild if it's existing. This is only if you have an existing unit that is non-conforming. Whatever you all decide on a square footage, it is saying whatever is non-conforming, how do you get back to what you already have if you choose to scrape and replace?
So then 10,000 square feet, even if the cap is low, they can not, it's a non-conforming property, I get it. Okay, that definitely changes my feeling about this.
okay, is everybody online clear as well?
Well, it's not non-conforming yet.
Yeah.
Subject to the new code.
Cliff, could you clarify what you said?
I said if I had a 10,000 square foot house and I want to redevelop it. And I want to build 10,000 square feet right where it was. Can I build when it's above the house cap? And they're saying, yes. I could build 10,000 square feet without the TDR.
Without a TDR or GMQS, that's the proposal on the floor.
Right, and so
Okay.
that kind of,
The other, like, the excluded and not just left it where it was. I think that the code basically also say that you could keep the 10,000 square feet. You just need to purchase the amount of TDRs to get back up to the 10,000 square feet, but it's a good question of if Prince Vandar's complex burned down or whatever, and it was a scrape, are you allowed to build back up to that, regardless of what I'm trying to like amend there with the current way the language is? Are you allowed to build up to that square footage? Because that's not explicitly allowed or prohibited in the language.
And Nick, you said-
amendment, they would be able to build 43,000 square feet back.
Okay.
For Princeton.
Without TDR.
Yeah, without TDR
Without
or GMQS.
Clarification real quick.
Yeah.
No one is saying that you can't build back to what you already have. It's your path of how you get there. That's what you all are trying to decide right now. We are not saying you can't build back. I think we've heard there's a property that we want to acknowledge. It's just the path of which you want to get there.
So if I can, I just want to add a question maybe to Max and Nick and a consideration for the group as we contemplate where we land on this. And that is, Nick, it sounds like the way you're describing it, you're describing someone who is wants to do something to their house and stay in that house. And I think that one of the things we'll be doing if we allow people to build back to their existing square footage without going a TDR or allocation path, there is a lot of incentive to sell that house. That house becomes very attractive to buy because it creates an easier path for you to build. Yes, I agree, Max, a much better performing large home, but also there will be tremendous incentive for people to sell those homes because the person who buys them gets a large home without having to go the large home path that everybody else does.
That's exactly the way it is right now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They get a
Yeah, okay. So, but I'm just saying that we're changing a lot and we're creating a little bit of a loophole to large without the set of requirements that we are asking for others to get to large.
Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, that's how I see it as well.
Yes.
Good point there, Mike. Anybody else have other? Andy, do you want to?
Yeah, so the way I'm thinking about this is, I like what Nick's saying, but I really think it needs to be both. So we're giving them the opportunity. This is kind of where Cliff was going. We're giving somebody the opportunity to rebuild a non-conforming structure. The zone district says you can't build any more than 5,000 square feet, but I got this 10,000 square foot house. We're gonna let you do that. But we're gonna make you meet tier 4 criteria, and we're gonna make you
supply TDRs above 5750. Well, you can do it, but you're gonna have to give something back to the community to be able to do it. To me, that makes sense, not just meeting tier 4 or tier 3, but to help add another dimension to the TDR market, where we may end up with these RTDRs and regular TDR from rural remote. Giving you the opportunity to do it, as opposed to just saying no. You can only build back 5,000 square feet because that's what's permitted in the zone district. And one other thing to keep in mind that I think that you were kind of getting at that I think bugs you is that if you've got a 15,000 square foot house, you want to redevelop it under this new criteria, or in the Bendar example where the house burns down, one of the most important criteria in the land use code is the ability to rebuild a non-conforming structure if it burns down. And if that goes away, or if that's compromised so that, well, I have this 10,000 square foot house and yeah, it was all built legally, but if it burnt down, I can only build 5,000. What kind of havoc that would wreak in the mortgage market and the insurance market would be horrible. So that's an important part of the code. And I think a reason why personally I can accept being able to still do that, even though it may be kind of offensive.
With or without TDRs, with or without GMQS.
Well,
You're saying with.
With.
I'm saying with.
Okay.
I'm saying with TDRs and the tier 3 or tier 4 criteria. And I think those are enough financial pain to incentivize what John wants, which is we're gonna get you to build a smaller house.
And Randy, that's exactly what's being proposed in here, and I think, Nick, if you want to respond to that, I think we should just take a vote and see where we're at with what's being proposed and move on from there. So Nick, you're more than
So I
welcome.
want to start off with both of your guys', both of you and Michael's comments on that. This is, these properties that are 10,000, whatever amount of square footage, that they're attracted because they might be above the limit that is going to be set. That's going to happen anyway. And when, even if you have TDRs or no TDRs, so people are still going to want to buy the 12,000 square foot home, even if you have to buy however many TDRs it's going to require to redevelop that. It's just money. And so what that does is that also increases the cost of property. And what is that going to do to the rest of the existing stock, the rest of new development? I think that a lot of the moves that are being proposed here is going to increase the cost dramatically for a lot of property, but I think that houses that are at, I don't know, 7,000 square feet or something like that, and requiring TDRs to be purchased for some slightly minor shifts in the footprint, might be disincentivizing again, like the development of underperforming houses. I think we like to look at extremes like Prince Bandar or all of 15,000 square foot homes, but sometimes we forget some homes that are kind of in the middle. Yeah, it might be larger than the 5750 that we've been talking about, but I think it's important to kind of look at all the existing stock and what a change like this might require for those property owners.
Thank
Well,
you.
I think all the positions have been clearly articulated. Alex, maybe we should bring the language back up so that everybody knows exactly what we're voting on. Randy, I think you summarized it really well. It's no one saying you can't build back to what you have. And I don't want to be a broken record here, but TDRs aren't the only option. The square footage quota system is also a pathway back to that square footage, and it would be subject to the tiering system. So we can highlight it here, redevelopment of existing square footage above what will be allowed under the new code allowable FAR limit, or the house size cap would be subject to the square footage quota system or a TDR program above the FAR or house size cap. And a scrape and replace outside of the existing footprint would be considered new development and subject to the new code and tiers and all of that.
So just to be clear, are we voting on this the way it's written? Because A moment ago, we were voting on whether.
No, we're voting on this the way it's written, and now that both positions have been articulated, let's keep it simple and.
We're voting on how it's written.
So I'm confused by the last sentence. Scrape and replace sentence, outside of existing footprint is considered new development. I mean, isn't that? I mean, are we trying to draw a distinction between redevelopment and scrape and replace?
An example, if you got an 8,000 square foot house and you've got 30 acres and you want to put it in one corner of the lot and you choose to scrape and replace it and you want to put it in the other corner of the lot, you're subject to the whole new tiering system.
So, and if you were not conforming in size, you can't do it.
Right.
So you can only rebuild a non-conforming structure in the existing footprint.
Yes, and that's to Jessica's point, we need to further.
In the envelope or the actual footprint of the structure?
Footprint of the structure.
No, that's the way it has.
That was
The
my
intent,
Just when you say
the
footprint of the structure.
intent is, and we can, people that know the code aren't here. We will work out how it's in the code, but it's not just the building footprint. We recognize there's a little bit more flexibility there.
It's the building envelope, is that an amendment that we can make?
No,
Don't use it personal, goes there, and designated building envelopes.
Yeah,
outside
building
the
is like
square.
you'd have to build a square like it's exactly. So the building envelope, you're right, it's building code.
We haven't chosen our terms very carefully.
Yeah, so.
So the intention is within the location that the building is already located. That is what you're voting on, and we'll clarify the actual.
Let's go.
Thank you.
So if we want to support Nick's idea, we have to vote no on this.
Right, yes. Yeah. Yes. So can we go ahead and call a vote? So this is the language we're voting on. To Joe's point, if you want to support Nick's idea, you vote no. So all those who would support the language as it's written, please raise your hand. Okay.
Can you just give those of us online a tally, because we can't see what's happening?
Yeah, we're counting it up, Michael.
I'm counting 16.
Yeah.
You're the only one supporting it, Michael.
Easy. All opposed.
Yes, all opposed.
All opposed, raise your hand.
Raise your.
Joe, I think that's a hand raised.
Oh, raise your hand.
Raise your hand if you're opposed. Two.
Two.
Yeah, mine.
Opposed are two.
Two. And I think we've got Adam weighing in as in agreement, so we're 17 to 2.
Okay.
We'll move it forward, and this, as a reminder, is moving forward into the package that will be voted on line by line next week, so. We're just.
So we got another chance.
You'll have a chance, but we're not gonna debate it at least, we wanna, and if you have, proposals, think that would make it palatable, we can work to massage those, but we'll move forward. Okay.
All right. So now we are moving into redevelopment. We're moving into square footage count. So we've got about a half hour to discuss this. And so to me, it feels like the square footage cap has been discussed quite a bit. And it's to the point where we're sort of like right. Remember the conversation we had with Don about right and right instead of like 8750, 9750. And yeah, Miles, do you want to give us a comparison and give us an overview?
And Alex, I think if we can pull up this guy, that one. Yeah, and from the packet, it's attachment B in what went out with the memo, it's got the table. When you look at the second page of attachment B, for the square footage thresholds that you all established last week, we wanted to come in with a couple scenarios just to provide some data to inform decision making. The two thresholds that we talked about last week, 8750, 9750. So staff has prepared, as you can see on the next page here. Yeah, if you want to go one more, Alex, here we go. What we've got is the FAR plus slope for a house cap of 15,000 as it is today for 9750 and 8750. You can see what that does for each of those when slope is applied in your maximum potential square footage that's built out. So at 9750, it would be 7.88 million square feet. And at 8750 be 7.435. And you can then also see on the second row, the energy use in greenhouse gases between the two. So the difference that we'd see there. And Kara, I know you pulled this together. Is there any other key differentiators that you want to highlight on this one?
No, just remember this is for planning purposes. And is not to be reflective of everything, but this goes back to the model from a couple months ago. And so it's our best guess is probably representative of what you would see at a 80, 85, 80% confidence rate. So again, it's more how they compare against one another, not the totality of what would actually happen on the ground.
So anyone?
Question for clarity, would you just define the slope reduction 25%? I'm pretty sure I know what that means, but just I'd like to hear it once again.
I will try and please others in the room correct me. So any parcel that has 30% slope or more is removed from your net parcel size, not to exceed more than 25% cap. So essentially, if you've got 50% of your, sorry, stay with me here. If half of your parcel is at a 40-degree or 40% slope, you're only capped at that 25 at a quarter of it.
You only lose a quarter of your.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's the cutoff on slope? Is it 30% or?
30%.
And there's zero credit above 30%?
Yes.
Only up to.
Cause I don't know that we've ever really talked about that.
I don't think we dug into the
Yeah.
threshold yet.
Yeah. And again, this is just to use it as to discuss how the slope will change.
Kara, do you have a base number of what 15,000 house caps would be compared to this? Right, so you've got flat cap at 9750. What's the flat cap 15,000
Oh,
number? Like
yeah.
what are we looking at today as the baseline?
Yes. Continue your questions and I will answer that in a moment.
Well, I don't have any more, surprisingly.
Okay, does anyone, are there other comments? I can't see. Okay.
Interpreting this as existing house size and the trend over the last 20 years, call it. Would you say that the trend is more towards the 8750 to 15,000 square foot residential construction, or the trend more in the middle? And then for maybe Alex knows this, what is the current 2-year permit backlog look like? Is it 6,000 square foot homes? Is it 15,000 square foot homes? Where are we with what the market is producing and what these guys are seeing in the business, in the real estate market for single family residents and high-end real estate? And the realtors could answer this too. And then the projection forward here of maximum house size, staying where we are and the existing, if we're saying we're not gonna do, are we looking at the UGB 529 structures above 9,751 feet? Potentially? Is that how you interpret this?
Rick, could you restate the question?
There's a lot of questions
Yeah,
in there.
there was a.
Okay, so the trend in the current existing house size and the 2-year backlog in permitting equals, sort of shows us a trend as to where the market's moving in high-end residential areas, right?
So, and what is that?
So I know there's gotta be dozens of permits locked down somewhere.
That was in the information from last week or.
Was it?
They've given us that information. I had
Yeah.
someplace, but the conversations there, and to see where it was headed.
You can see where I was headed. What would your intuition's telling you, Max? Maybe you can say it's headed towards about 5750.
Probably, I don't know. I mean, I can't claim to know,
Well, you.
but my small part of the market for sure. So I don't know that I could.
And then the next, the maximum house size, is it suggesting that these numbers at the bottom of the totals are what we're anticipating under the current
3,200 average.
environment or 200.
This is assuming that, the scenario that you all have drafted is showing how the maximum house size within each square footage would be allowed. It does not mean people will build to that. It is just what would be allowed.
But this is, if we institute all these recommendations and the county commissioners adopt them.
Yes.
Okay, so we can look forward to
So you can see for the.
1,600 homes above 77.
Yes, so the intention of this table is so you can see, oh, Alex, can you scroll back? I'm sorry. You can see your decision point as it relates to house size of where the square footage is and where they lie. That would be above either your 8750 threshold that you talked about, the 9750, and then what is within above that.
So if we selected a 9750, for example, the rightmost column would go into the second rightmost column. And if we selected 8750, then the two rightmost columns would go into the third, the 650. So basically, we'd be creating a big bubble of opportunities right up to whatever it is. That's the limit that we select.
Some of those people might decide to go to Vail.
Or they might,
Or somewhere else.
or they might.
They might decide that if they can't buy, build 12 or 15,000 square feet, they might decide they don't want to build, they want to go somewhere where they can.
Or they might sell
We're
RTD.
the outlier at 15. You remember, we're the outlier at 15, it's not Jackson Hole is.
So we are the outlier, it's true though.
Right, we're the outlier, we're the biggest.
The other.
that's good to know.
Biggest house is the lowest.
Well, Eagle County, I think, might be bigger.
That's not what we had information early in the game, but Eagle County is also the best.
Yeah.
The town of
They were
Village
saying
is
the
maybe
same.
the only one.
Town
No,
Village,
they're
I think you're right.
less.
Town Village.
So-
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Sierra.
Yes, please.
What's the value with building 9750 over 8750? Because isn't that kind of the decision we need to make?
Value in terms of.
In terms of square footage, like what's the value add? Like why should we opt for building bigger than 8750? Because don't we need to make a decision in that range?
Yeah, the decision on the table from the group was really coming down to 8750, 9750, and Sierra, I think your question is really, it's the value of 1,000 square feet.
There's a lot of different values you could place on it, but that's the difference right now in square footage we're talking about. It's 1,000 square feet, but 8750 and 9750.
But I think you're talking about something different, Sarah, if I'm right. You're saying, what's the community value for allowing that additional 1,000 square feet between 87 and 97? What is?
Well, I mean, I obviously opt for a much lower number, but given that this is the range we have to choose from, I want to know what the case is for going bigger than smaller within our parameters.
If we look at the redevelopment, there's 162 houses that are between 97 and 15,000, which we just talked about, the TDRs, whether they want to allow them to go that high. So it's 162 houses that can be redeveloped at over 9750, or if we go 8750, it's 200 houses. And the redevelopment piece, which I feel all along is the biggest piece, more than new. And so it's really those 63 houses that are between 8750 and 9750. And they go bigger. And will we allow them to stay that size?
Doug, I think you and Sierra put a fine point on it. Really, where we're at, it comes down to a values-based decision and that 1,000 square feet difference. And I think it's important to hear from all of our committee members. So maybe we take a minute and just go around the horn and take 30 seconds or a minute and just kind of describe where you're at on the 8750, 9750 question.
I'll just,
Yeah, thank you. I was just gonna suggest that we do that rather than have.
I can finish up what I was trying to puke out here, but if I look at this and I look at 57 going the other way towards 3251, I'm seeing a trend of 704 to 725. Which leads me to believe that some of what we're thinking about is increasing the opportunities to build on a smaller home. It's still sort of creating opportunities for people to do bigger homes. If you look at these projections, maybe that's just a fourth grade look at the math here, but I'm not seeing community character be preserved with the values by looking at this lower maximum house size opportunity.
But don't forget what you all spend 9 months doing.
I know,
You
that's what I
created
guess I'm
tiers,
saying.
right? You all have created different ways.
Right.
We could have been out of here in and out in one meeting if you all said, we don't want above 5750, we're done, right? But that was not the value you all discussed as a community.
Okay.
So you have put in incentives to say you want it to be harder to go up. The decision before you right now is what's the cap, right?
Well, this helps me make up my mind.
Where you falling out of?
Value
Falling out.
is one thing, sometimes it's also what can actually
And
become
let's go to
law.
you next.
Honestly, I was looking at this, when we discussed this last, we were looking at 500 square foot TDRs. And multiples of that, and how we would get to, either 9750 or 8750. Yeah, Max, I think you said it well near the end of the meeting, maybe we're not being bold enough. But this goes to what I was just saying to you, that what do we think will actually can be stomached by the community, all the communities and all of the county? What can we actually recommend that would become code? I lean more and more towards 7750, which would be 4 TDRs to get you there. I was inside a 5,000 square foot house. I couldn't believe how big that thing is, up in the snow mass. And and this is going to be 2,000 square foot bigger than that. So maybe we're not being bold enough. I mean, now that the multiples of TDRs really. We could do anything with 500 square foot multiples of. So. I think the number one thing we all want to achieve is reduce house cap. And my only concern about that is especially in certain zones.
Thank you. I think I hear maybe, go lower. And Debbie or Jessica, do you want to go? And then we'll go around the table just so we can keep it straight. Any volunteers on whether we go clockwise or counter?
Okay, I guess we're going this way. I feel really strongly about slope reduction. I think that it's about house size, but it's also about making sure that the development actually responds to the parcel that it's on. I'm comfortable with 9750, just seeing this. Am I comfortable going lower? Sure. But to me, with the tiers that we've created, with the conversation on TDRs, and all the inputs that we've had, it would be difficult to get to that number, and I feel comfortable with that. And then in some areas that is appropriate, it makes sense.
What did you say, 87 or 97?
97, that 9750.
Nick.
Column 3.
So, one of the things I wanted to bring up is that these numbers, I think, were generated, like the 8750, 9750 were generated from a informal poll that this group took, and it was an average. And so at that time, none of us, we were just throwing numbers out, thinking that they were just starting points of discussion. And now it's become this more formalized things that have stuck in our heads, as that this is something that the group has somehow formed consensus on, that 9750 is a number that we would like. And some people want it way lower, some people might want it way higher. So I don't know how there's just built-in bias now to that number that wasn't really firmly established. We kind of took this informal process and number, and then now it's this official thing that we're trying to make an official decision on. But in any regard, I would agree that slope reduction and site conditions need to be built into what house size could fit on there. And I lean more towards the larger house size to pair with the tiered systems that we have, the site requirements that are being built into the performance standards, and the TDR process that we've been talking about. I think I'm comfortable with that, mainly because it might be impossible to get to that square footage. I'm not thinking that this is something that all properties can achieve. specific properties and, would only be appropriate for that house size, and then you have to do, on top of that, you have to achieve all the aggressive, performance standards. So, that's kind of where I'm at.
So which is-
So,
9750 then.
I guess if it's just two different numbers.
Thanks, Morgan.
I support 8750. And the reason is because it's the lowest number we've come to as a consensus for this group. Of course, I'd like a lower number, but, and if you look at the caucuses of where people live, they have voted for low numbers. If you look at the caucuses where people don't live, year-round residents, members of the community who would come to meetings like this, that's where you have just investment properties that are higher numbers. So I'm voting for 8750, and we should also consider that once this goes to the commissioners, they're likely going to push around and the number can end up higher.
Or lower. 8750 for me. I'd rather see it lower, but I'll take the 8750 as a compromise.
Well, and I'm hearing a theme at 8750 or lower, and also a theme at 9750 or bigger, so it means we might be in the right place.
So I'm echoing what Jessica said. You know, slope reduction, I'm a supporter of 9750. I also want to tag on, I've said this before, Max mentioned it before. Remember, we're coming from 15,000 square feet, and I want to feel like I'm taking a step toward respecting people's property rights and people that are already here and have expectations. Huge investments in property. I think the 9750 recognizes that better than 8750. It also requires 2 more TDRs than 8750. Maybe that's obvious, but it does, which is good for preserving rural and remote. So there's a benefit there. And as Nick said, it's not going to be easy to get 9750. You're going to have to meet a lot of different criteria. So for all those reasons, 9750 is what I support.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So I just think consumption wise and the way these properties seem to cause expansion in other service industries and so on, that if we have 100 homes at 8750 or 100 homes at 9750, it makes a huge difference in the big picture. And one of our former counselors in Basalt said one of the issues that he had was as the expansion occurs in the resort areas, we just get more cars driving through our community. And that has always hit home on just a basic fundamental level. If we want to encourage, bigger homes with more service providers, and then we set the cap at a higher elevation. We're at 8,000 feet here in the courtroom. I'm happy with that, but 8750 is okay with me too. I just think we've got to put a lid on it somehow. Everywhere we can benefits the bigger global goals and objectives of the commissioners. Thank you.
I don't think we know what our chart looks like if we're taking away all the land over 30% slope from lots. I think that's going to have a dramatic effect on where people end up with their lot size, and I just think the numbers aren't all that accurate once you do that. But I'm at 9750. That's 65% of what is allowed now, and I think that's a significant reduction. And that's why I support it.
So thank you, John.
I don't think we're bold enough. I know that maybe this is the number we're stuck with, and I'm going to live with the smallest number possible, but I think in context of the bigger goals of what the POCC laid out for us, it still feels like a stretch. We're going to make it for the 8750 house. So for me, it's just hard for me to do the math. If this is what we've been asked to do, if these are the goals, and we can still support basically 9,000 square feet on. So I believe it should be less than that, but I'm gonna live with the lowest number that we can come up. Thank you.
I'm a bit torn, but I think we've achieved so much more. As I've said from the very beginning, I didn't think that the square footage number mattered nearly as much as all of the other things that we've discussed. And the more we discuss it, the more I still believe that. So, I know it sounds silly, but 1,000 square foot, give or take, doesn't mean that much to me. I don't think it makes as big of a difference as some of the other things. So I think I would lean towards the 9750. Because surprise, surprise, I like the idea that those few places that can do it are going to extinguish a TDR. And we all know my concerns with making sure that that's a very competitive market. So I think I would lean that way, but you know, all of this has come down to, and we can feel it in this room right now, it looks like that number is that 9,300. So I would consider to going to 9,250 and having a complete compromise with everybody, because it just feels like that's what's going to be the easiest compromise. And we're kind of at a point where that might be what we need to do. I mean, nobody's going to get exactly what they want in this room, but I think we've all done a great job of compromising and listening to each other. So now
We can call the next thing.
I'm an 8750 guy. I agree with Max entirely. The price is gonna be the FAR number, the other stuff is gonna be, or not the FAR, excuse me, max house, yeah, max house size. That's gonna be the number that everybody talks about. That's gonna be the political difficulty, I would argue, but I think that the lower number makes more sense. I think what you pointed out, people that they're saying, that's plenty. It's investment on it's always.
I think we should keep going on.
Mona, are you gonna-
I am. I'm just gonna wait till other members of the committee.
I'll go at 8750. I'm okay with that.
9750 for TDRs, and looking at the energy use and the greenhouse gas emissions, we get the lion's share of the greenhouse gas reduction by going to 9750, and we still leave some individual property rights available and on the table.
8750. For all the reasons other people have said, I would like to see it smaller, but I recognize the compromise and the TDR, you know, keeping the TDR market open.
We've started, so let's go online. How about?
I'll go. No one's mentioned this, and I dare say I mentioned it, but I do think there's truth to it. I believe in reviewing what other resorts were doing. I think the Telluride number was 10,000. Jackson, I think, is 10,000. Crested Butte, I think they're 10,000 too. Am I correct on those three?
That's smaller than 100.
What?
The old town, right?
The town is smaller.
Between Mount Crested Butte and the old town.
Well, in any case, I'm going to go for 9750 for all the reasons stated. I also think Brian's got a good reason that the energy use, the bulk of the energy use is taken care of with 9750. It's sort of an incremental difference, dropping down to 8750. And I think we put into place a lot of restrictions that will make it very difficult to attain the 9750. So I'm comfortable with that number.
All right. Michael, you want to go?
How about we go to Adam's hand up?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thanks. I'm driving. I wanted to weigh in on this one verbally because it is important. I felt from the beginning that as long as we had the higher standards, mostly from performance, that if a homeowner was able to achieve that higher performance in the tiered system, that 9750 is acceptable. I still believe that. I do think it's going to be difficult, and I like the added TDR requirement to get there. And you know, if you can I go back to some comments August had on some larger homes that they had worked on, that you can achieve a very efficient home at a larger square footage if you really design it correctly and have the correct systems. And I think our tiered system's accomplishing that. So I am comfortable with 9750 for that reason. And it is a significant, more than 1/3 or roughly 1/3 reduction from what was current. So again, for those reasons, I support the 9750.
Okay,
Thanks,
Chris.
Adam. Chris.
Thanks, sorry. So I'm going to go in the 8750 direction. I think from what we've seen on the table, the additional GHG reductions are significant with the direction we want to head. Every bit matters a lot, and the overall square footage build out is also significant. To some of the concerns on the TDR market, totally hear those. I would anticipate, this is just based on a listener opinion, so take it with a grain of salt, but would anticipate that there would still be a robust TDR market under 8750. From a values perspective, I would like to see lower, given that's where we landed. So that's what I would like to see.
Great, thank you, Chris. We want to go next?
Maybe Lydia, Sierra.
I'm happy to weigh in. Hey, everybody again. Yep, I'm gonna cast my vote for 8750. I absolutely wish it was smaller, and I don't think it's bold enough. But in this case, I'm gonna just lean in that direction. I also think if there's any way we can incentivize downsizing. My dad and I were talking today about something they're doing in Europe, actually making buildings smaller, because I think a lot of these second homes, homeowners are realizing that that's the right thing to do too. So 8750 for me, and am mostly very happy with all of our progress.
Sierra, thank you. Lydia.
I'm gonna go with the 8750. I think that that size home should be doable for anyone moving to this community, and it is time to take a stand and try not to build bigger homes. And I enjoy working with this committee, and that's how I feel. 8750.
Thank you. And I think we haven't heard from Boris yet online, and then we'll go to our co-chair.
Great.
Boris, I don't know if you can hear us.
Oh, yeah, I'm here. I think I'm gonna go with 9250 for the compromise aspect of it, just strictly on that. I definitely hear what Brian's saying, and achieving net zero with performance standards is doing a lot in itself. And then I also agree with everyone else that anything bigger than 8750 is not necessary. So out of compromise, I'm going to go with 9250.
I think we got to go around again.
But I think it is almost split though, it really could be.
I'll give you the solid.
Well, let's get it all in.
Yeah, is that it? Michael, you want to go? Shall I go?
Go ahead.
I'm gonna go with 8750, and I understand the value of TDRs and where we're at with that. I feel that it's Earth Day is on Saturday. And I feel like there's a lot more into it than the energy performance. There's the quality of life, the people who are having to come into town, the building materials, the embodied energy that's used in building materials. Those are the factors that also play into that. I too would probably support a smaller house size. I understand though the property rights, the expectations people have come into the community with, and that's hard to take away that expectation if you're thinking you're going to build a 10,000 square foot house to tell somebody you're not. But I do feel that 8750 is probably the top of the limit in my mind. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Mona and Michael.
So I'm at 8750 with kind of just a little bit of a caveat, and that is, we didn't wrestle this TDR extinguishment idea to the ground, and I know that there's a path to larger square footage through the allocation system, but if we were to get this extinguishment idea to work kind of at more or less as written, going bigger would result in a net greater reduction than that increase in square footage, which is sort of one of the, I think, kind of brilliant aspects of it. But because we didn't get there for the reasons that everyone has stated in choosing between the two numbers, I'm at 8750.
Okay, great.
You want to hear the numbers, the tally?
Yeah.
So 14 at 8750, 1 Forrest at 9250, and
Two.
8. Oh,
No, I didn't.
well, he
I
voted.
didn't think I could go.
Yeah, I put him at 9750, so 8.
So it was 8 at 9750 and 14 at 8750.
And 1 in the middle, if that's an option.
And one of the things I heard was bias in my rough tally, maybe this lines up with mine. Those at 8750 seem to feel like there was more of a pull lower, just implicitly. So what do we think of those numbers?
Could we have a new vote and introduce 9250 in there? And see what happens?
I like that motion. That's exactly where I was going, but I defer to our co-chairs, Mona and Michael.
I think we could check that out and see where that goes, so.
And also.
I think-
You gotta get close by.
What about the lower? Trying to get 5 feet lower
Well,
to build
that's-
consensus.
I agree entirely, but I think if you're gonna pick one in the middle, and based on what Miles just said, the consensus amongst the 8750 people was less. Or the feeling, so if you're gonna.
Correct.
We also ought to do one below and see where it comes out, because maybe some people will go down and some people will go up, I mean.
Vote which one you want.
I'm on the favor.
Next to you.
All in favor of 0, say aye.
Chris, I think you had a comment. I know in the room it's hard when there's crosstalk. So Chris, I hope you can hear us.
Yeah, sorry. I was just gonna agree with what was just said. I mean, I think if we're gonna vote on 9250, we probably need to add a lower tier. And I was kind of chuckling to myself because then I think the compromise probably becomes 8750. But I defer to everyone on how we want to set this up.
Well, I think that's an interesting proposal, actually. Thank you, Dan. So,
I think what's gonna happen though at the end is when the elected officials are sitting over here and the applicants are sitting on the other side. That number is gonna be negotiated, and they're still gonna have to come up with a rationale to support 14-8 vote we just had at an elected official level. Right? So they're gonna get an opportunity, if we set a bar here, to hear a whole bunch of other feedback over whatever period of time it happens, to make a decision whether they're gonna stay with that or increase it, or maybe go lower. So I think it's really kind of moot until it gets to their table and goes through P and Z. We make that recommendation, but we're advisory and we're representative of the community, but it's still gonna land on their desks. So this debate is kind of, are we talking 500 square feet either way? It's almost unback.
I would actually counter that. And here's the perspective is that the board is that this question has been before the board before, right?
Okay.
And this committee got set up primarily on this topic. And as we've said from the beginning, it's a hard fought compromise of what's being represented to the community. If you all go in splintered, the board is going to splinter and is going to go for the last voice in the room. If whatever you all can coalesce around, even if you don't like it, the board is going to have more of a backbone because you all gave it to them. So yes, it's going to go to the board, and there's going to be, Morgan or someone said it, you're going to have people on both sides yelling that they don't like it, right? What is going to give the board the backbone to actually make the action is going to be whatever you all can coalesce around.
So
We
you're
have the
looking for,
consensus, it's much stronger.
you're looking for informed consent or a 26-0? Are you looking for?
It's whatever you all can get
22-4 or
to. I think it's
18-5 or, I mean, I think we can more the better. We could say we get 100% if it's 87-50.
Hey,
We can't.
please, we can't follow you when everybody's talking, and it's an important conversation, so just try. Here's a question. Maybe as we like ask a series of questions to zero in on this. I think, Nick made the point that the numbers, we've got very specific numbers that we're using as our points of reference. But is there anybody in the room who, if they could, would be advocating for going bigger than 9750? Are we comfortable with our top end? Because I think it was Doug who made the point, look, if we're going to pick a new middle number, we should, there's actually more advocacy for going lower than there was to find a middle number. But are we there in that, we're comfortable with our top number? I don't hear anybody advocating for going bigger than the top number, but I hear people advocating for going smaller than the small number.
And Michael, since you're not in the room, I think that's a good question. Anyone advocating for bigger than 9750? Let's confirm that top one. Michael, you're correct.
Okay. So I think I think it was Doug. I'm getting so I can recognize voices who made the point. So just as a that's an accomplishment in and of itself, right? That we've got our ceiling. And then I'll let us discuss how we might contemplate other numbers.
Well, we might propose we could go the opposite direction, is how many people would be in favor of a number that's lower than 8750 at this point? We could check that temperature in the room and see how many people would be supportive of that. So if you could keep your hands up.
Good question, Mona.
My problem with that would be that we end up with a smaller majority. And that doesn't sit as well. Sending it to the commissioners. I don't really want to lessen. I mean, I'd like to see it smaller, but I want to respect the people who wanted the bigger number and not lose people based on that, not send a smaller majority number to the commission.
I'm sorry, did we get a count? Yeah,
Did we?
you were on screen as well. Okay, so I think what I would say to that, Debbie, is that's a point to make to the county commissioners, that maybe we can still move towards a greater consensus, and maybe it wouldn't have any weight, but we could move towards this greater consensus between 8750 and 9750. I mean, there's a proposal of 9320, somebody, and then
92.
9250. I know, like, oh my God, not one or another.
Let's get late.
Yeah,
Bill's right.
and we could take the temperature of that and see if we get to consensus. There may be, or is there, I don't know what the question is, but maybe it's like, what can you live with? Can you live with that larger number? And that's where we go to the county commissioners and we say, and we have this many people on the committee who would actually support a smaller number. I don't know, Kara, if that would just totally miss things.
I think that you all you've got a couple, wherever you can land on a meeting and coalesce around a number is what is going, because remember, this is going to be a lot on the commissioners, and they're going to have a lot of voices, and wherever you can stand strong, whatever number that is, wherever that range.
So going out that range, I think we might be 100% if we give the range of 8750 to 9750. Everyone seemed to be comfortable with that. Can we give them the range that we are 100% coalescing around?
That's not a bad idea. That's a thought.
We're just talking was.
it's a compromise, and or we could just split it down the middle.
And the range is something that's been contemplated. Remember, it started you all at, I think it was 8 to 10, and now it's down to 87 to 97. So we're throwing it in. And Chris has been, I see his virtual hand has been frantically popping up and down. So I want to give.
Yeah, thanks. So I like the idea of a compromise vote, but I want to suggest that, so I feel like everybody's really acting in good faith here and trying to get there together, which is great because I'm sure there's folks in the room who might be interested theoretically in going above 9750. Like that conversation had happened throughout. And I feel like there's some kind of like effort and constraint all around to say, let's focus in and get this done. To that end, you know, I guess like my proposal is that what was the tally on folks that wanted to go lower?
No, lower.
The lower question was never fully answered. I counted about 8 roughly. And then
Okay. So I guess my proposal is like, I wonder if, you know, a compromise is like those folks leaving the push for lower on the table and having 8750 be one compromise option.
Yeah.
I'll just leave that there.
And
that's, you know, and that's like just like a backing away from the rest of the conversation to keep things simple and focused.
Well, and as the hour is getting late, and we are going to be having a line by line vote on all the components of the recommendation at the next meeting. Do you want to do a straw poll on just to test 9250? Would we get consensus?
Why not?
Can I just make a point? Because I think all of us recognize we're gonna compromise here. That you've got a majority of people that are on the low end of the scale, and now we're pushing up. And that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, what would be, sorry, go ahead, John, but I'll add something when you're done.
Putting on the lower end, and the compromise is to move up, we'll move in the wrong direction.
But then there's no compromise. But he's just saying more, we're for
Right.
8750, that's his point.
Yeah. So maybe the compromise number, John, to your point, is something lower than the middle.
Yeah, here's a math way to do it. Take the number who voted for 8750, multiply those two numbers together. Take the 9750, multiply those two numbers together, divide it by the total number of votes, and what's that number?
But it would sure be nice to stay at 500.
Yeah, I get it. But then we'll see where that is, like how roundable that is to a 500.
What about just using the process we did before by all voting on what number we would like to see and then using the median?
Hold on, there's a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
We have Michael repeat that equation one more time. I'm following.
It's just 14 divided by 26 and 8 divided by 26.
14 were 8750.
9150.
And 11
How many were 9250, which brings us back to.
What was our count again? What was the count?
148750
And
88 at
Yeah,
97.
14 and 8. So it's almost twice.
But
that
don't forget
8750.
Forest, don't leave Forest in, though.
Forest
Yeah,
in the
one.
middle.
See where that goes.
We'll just put Forrest's number in as proposed.
Compromise is, no one's happy.
Alex,
They all go home.
that's what compromise is, but you're right. Alex, did you get pull a number? I've heard
9100.
So what does it come out, Alex?
I didn't get the number.
9100 feet.
Brian did it.
9113.
9113.
Right on.
Yeah.
So we can round it down to 91.
At least the math works.
To keep it in increments of 500.
9,000.
I make a motion, we go to 9100.
9,000. You want to
Okay.
hang on, gang, because 5750 is
Yes.
our exemption.
Yeah.
So we would want to do in increments of 50 above that, so, or 500 above that.
500.
So we're either at
9250.
9250 or 87.
Let's go.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Speed this along. but Motion that we set it at 9250.
Second.
And
Agree.
when we think about voting for this, think not necessarily about up or down, but Can I live with it?
Yeah.
Yep.
And will the commissioners accept and move it forward?
Let's just, one last thing before we go, let's think about the caucuses that have thoroughly discussed this. Who represent many more people than in this room who have voted on D750 in Brush Creek, D750 in Maroon Creek, 87 or 8250 in Capital.
I don't think they want to go there.
250 in Old Snowmass.
It helps.
750, sorry.
In the conversation.
And they would still trump this.
So it's still.
There's a lot of 15,000 square foot caucuses out there.
You know. Start with East Bass, and there are an actual more voters there, like actual number of residents. We have a motion.
Okay.
And we do,
Yeah.
we do have a motion on the table. Any other comments before we vote?
And that motion is 9250.
That motion is done.
Yes.
Yeah, and
So a no speeches vote.
it's a no speeches vote. It's a yes, a no, or and I can live with it. Is everybody clear?
And hold it so we can count.
Yeah, and let's hold it high and proud so we can get a tally.
So 9,100.
I know. Send it.
Motion is 9250.
Being respectful of the peers here. Maybe some.
God, there are a lot of sideways thumbs. Well, the sideways thumbs, if you're saying I can live with that, I thought that's what we're all doing. Right? This is a compromise, so. Seems pretty good. So how many no votes are there? Two. That's a pretty good consensus.
Is that correct? Am I counting two downs?
You still count?
Two downs.
Okay.
Keep them up, guys, if you got it
Please keep
now.
them up a little longer.
This is the.
Oh, I should go now. Come on.
Okay.
Read it.
Morgan, were you sideways before?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Sorry. You can change it.
You can change it.
Four down.
Washington DC can't compromise. It's got to start somewhere.
You have a DC dynamic. The longer we hold open the vote, the more it'll change.
Let's vote on it. Einstein next.
Yes, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay, so what is it?
Davis, you got it?
No,
How about sideways? You
I don't like people.
I didn't do sideways. I'm just going down or live with
Motion
it.
or sideways? Can I just get a count of sideways? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Chris was a 7. Chris was sideways.
Someone else.
Yeah, you're seven.
And so is my.
Lydia,
And Michael's.
yeah.
Oh, Michael sideways, yeah. So there's
I-
eight
I had-
sideways.
That is.
And 7.
Okay.
Or 8.
I thought there was eight. Oh my God. We're gonna use
We're
this.
split. So straw poll, I had 5 yeses, 7 sideways, 4 no's, and the no's kept piling up late in the game.
Okay, you don't have consent.
Somebody else.
Well,
I got the chorus, but
Well, the driver, Forrest didn't vote.
Forrest didn't vote.
More than 6.
Forrest
did vote, voted yes
via the chat.
He did.
Yes.
Adam voted yes as well.
So that's 6.
Adam.
6 yeses, 7 sideways and 4 no's.
Sure. Okay, let's get over to it.
So, I-
Up and down vote on the 87. Saying I can-
yeah.
Okay,
So
sorry,
it's got-
Jessica,
can we do an up or down vote on the 8750? Just as,
I
I
would
feel like
like,
there might be movement.
I would like to entertain that motion on the table if the,
I make the
For
motion.
everyone.
all right,
Okay, no sideways.
up or
Can we do
down,
up or
yeah,
down?
please,
Up or
we'll
down?
make it easy on
The
us.
up or downs.
8750,
Being the number.
Yeah.
8750 up or down.
Lydia, there you go.
We're the same. It's the same. No, maybe not.
No, there are only 4 no's.
No, there's 5.
The
There's a-
castle behind me is probably less than 8750, just saying.
It's
The church.
It's a church, yeah, sorry.
You get it?
Yeah. There's 5 down in 8750 and there's 4 down in 9250. So.
There you go. I thought we were just voting on 8750.
Yeah, so what was the total on 8750 just now? What's the?
There was
Five
five, I'm just gonna do simple math. There was 5 no's in the 8750 and the 9250, there was 4 no's. So you all are stuck somewhere in between. What I would suggest is that next week we are doing a line by line. We can work with the co-chairs and you all can decide what a final vote is.
Darn, I was hoping for arm wrestling.
There's still one more meeting. And a special meeting. Don't forget that you all agreed on a special meeting, so.
Yeah.
Twice a week. That's what I heard. You're up against it.
Really good work.
Thank
Good
you.
work.
Before everybody leaves, I just wanted to give Mona the chance to make it happen. I think
Yeah.
you've made so much progress.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And this has really been a lot of work and a lot of compromise and just a lot of deliberation. It's really been thoughtful. So thank you all. I think it's important.
And if you can't make the next meeting, we'll send an email out, but you can assign a proxy to carry your vote.
Right.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Enjoy the snow.
Yeah.